I immigrated to the United States from Russia 10 years ago, but before that, I was a truck driver. I often drove the route with the seemingly innocuous name of the M56, a road that Stalin had built with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. They were people the state had, in effect, condemned to death, and the state didn't want them back. About half of them died. They froze to death, starved and collapsed from exhaustion. And to this day, many drivers swear they see ghosts on the M56. Traveling up on the M56, I would come to the Coloma Highway, which translated means the Road of Bones. It isn't a metaphor. When the Gulag prisoners died constructing these roads, they wouldn't bury their bodies due to the permafrost making the ground too hard. So the prisoners' bones were mixed in with the road and covered over. The road itself literally has the bones of many tens of thousands of people mixed in. To call the M56 or the Road of Bones roads gives the wrong impression, at least on the last time that I drove the route back in 2010. It isn't a paved road, but covered in stones laid thickly over the Siberian dirt that turns into quicksand when it rains. The M56 runs straight north into Siberia, and there are still countless deaths on this road. It often washes out and portions of the road would just collapse. Massive dust storms sweep across it, causing collisions and deaths as trucks and cars swerved into trees or passed into the other side of the road. And my cargo was entirely uninsured. I drove with tons of beer and glass bottles in the back, some of which ended up shattering from the endless vibrations of driving over the sharp rocks all over the road, which also ended up slicing up my tires. I would go through over 15 tires a month, sometimes 25. Take a truck loaded with between 15 to 18 tons of beer and blow out a tire, and you could be sitting on an instantaneous fatal crash waiting to happen. All down the M56, you would see thousands and thousands of discarded tires on the sides of the road. As for the beer, the people living in northern Siberia loved beer. I think they drank it more than water. And beer is more popular there than vodka, despite the fact that it's Russia. Maybe beer is cheaper than bottled water. In some places it is. The story of my encounter on the M56 started before I had stopped at the warehouse dock to load up 15 tons of beer in my aging second-hand Japanese truck. It started when I saw a man standing outside just staring at me. He had very dark eyes and a round Siberian face with ruddy cheeks. He wore a fur jacket, but I couldn't tell which animal that it had come from. He looked bundled up, with sweaters and multiple layers of pants. The fur coat also included a hood, which still had the face of the animal attached, though flattened and distorted. I immediately recognized that it had come from a brown bear. I got out of my truck, lighting up a cigarette, and I started walking in his direction, pulling my jacket closed and putting a thick woolen hat on my head. The wind whipped crazily all around me, sending the snow sideways and directly into my face. I cursed, trying to turn my head. The front door stood just beside the strange man, and I needed to go inside. Might as well start the paperwork now, I figured. The man just kept staring, however, even as I got near. I was about to ask if he had a problem when he started speaking. "You are going on Colma, the Road of Bones?" he asked. "Yeah, I take the M56 north first," I said. "That's my job. I travel here and I travel there. As long as most of the cargo doesn't get broken or fall off the truck, I make a decent living." "You should not go alone," he said. "The Road of Bones will break you, it will crush you, as it crushed the bones of those who built it. You will not survive this journey, my friend, not alone." I laughed, but a chill ran down my spine. What are you, some kind of Siberian shaman? I asked. He smiled but said nothing. Are you a psychic, friend? Do you tell me my future? I only tell the truth, he said. No more and no less. Many thought that they would survive the road of bones. Most still lay there, skulls eternally grinning under the wheels that pass over them. So what are you asking me? I said. I'm not asking you anything, he said. But if you want any chance to survive, I should come with you. I will travel with you to Magadan, at the end of the road of bones, and then you will be free. You will have seen the true nature of the road of bones, and maybe you'll be alive. I squinted at the man, wondering if I was talking to a madman or a drunkard, but he seemed completely coherent and logical. I wondered if maybe this was just the strangest hitchhiking ruse that anybody had ever dreamed up. I stepped back, feeling cold. The smell of fumes from the other trucks pulling into the warehouse parking lot mixed with the scent of the evergreens that surrounded us here at the edge of town. What's your name? I asked him, looking closer at the skin of his fur coat. It looked like a bear. It felt too hot standing next to the heat of the warehouse to be wearing fur. Yakov, he said. In my town, they call me Yakov the Seer. I suppressed a slight smile at this. Yakov, my name is Nikolai. Yes, I am a truck driver. Why do you not just ask me for a ride? Because I want you to prepare yourself, he said cryptically. And then he would say nothing else on the subject, but simply told me that he would come back once my cargo had been loaded. I smiled and shook his hand, but as I walked away, I felt him staring at my back. And goosebumps rose on my arms and legs, and I wondered whether I had made the right call. Soon the truck was loaded and I was ready to leave the lot. I stood in front of the door and I looked around for Yakov, but the thick snow obscured my vision. I couldn't see farther than 15 or 20 feet in any direction. Shrugging, I pulled myself into the driver's seat and pulled the door closed. The warm air from the truck made my tingling toes and fingers warm up. I took off my snow-covered jacket and hat. The smell of wet wool still reminds me of winter to this day. And then there was a sudden rapping at my window. I jumped, reaching under my seat for my P96 pistol, which I always kept loaded and hidden in case of bandits. But as I looked, I saw Yakov's round, serious face looking in at me. I sighed, motioning for him to go around and get in. Because this was an old Japanese truck, it meant that the driver and passenger sides were switched from typical US or Russian convention, even though I still drove on the right side of the road. Yakov had a small leather sack with him that bulged with his few possessions. He sat down and looked over at me and gave me a faint smile. Let's go, he said. We have a very long ride. Indeed we did. At least 72 hours up to Yakutsk, where I would drop off the entire load of beer, and then a trip down to Magadan, which could take another 5 days. By then I had to pick up another load in Magadan, a contract that I'd already accepted. They expected me there in 8 days, and I would have to drive perhaps 17 or 18 hours a day to make it in time. I set off slowly, the wind howling outside and the snow quickly covering the windshield. As I puttered down the paved road and towards the M56, Yakov told me a story. I used to be a driver on the M56 as well. One time, I had a load of vodka to transport to Yakutsk. It was summer. Dust blew so thickly across the road that I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. I was afraid that I would go off the road and flip the truck. Night had started to fall, so I pulled over on the side of the road and I fell asleep. I awoke to a tapping on the door. I looked up and no one stood there. I wondered if it was a trick. Bandits are known to rob truckers along these roads, as you know. and sometimes they even block the road with disabled vehicles to force the trucker to stop. Then they come out drunk and armed and steal whatever he's transporting. I nodded. I had heard so many stories. I had an old Makarov pistol. Must have been from the time of Stalin himself, he laughed. But I'll tell you, it was a good gun. As long as you cleaned it and take care of it, it would last a long time. Just like the AK-47, cheap and durable. I grabbed my gun and a flashlight and began to shine the light out the windows. The dust had greatly receded and now I could see at least 30 or 40 feet in every direction. To my amazement, I saw people working in the middle of the night, but they looked strange and ethereal. They dug at the road with their hands, using half-broken shovels and rocks and ancient, rusted wheelbarrows to move the dirt. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was dreaming. I saw the identification sewn into the back of their jackets, a series of numbers that would replace that person's name, as they used to do in the gulags. I started my truck intending to get the heck out of there, and as soon as the engine made a noise, they all turned to look at me. They had woolen caps and thinly padded jackets with holes in their pants. None of them wore gloves. They shivered, trembling even though it was warm out at the time. And then I noticed the horrific wounds that each of them had. Many had gunshot wounds to the head, while others had crushed arms or hands. Each of them looked like a skeleton, starved nearly to death. They were all dead, they had to be. I drove forwards, hoping that they would move out of the way, but they didn't. Very slowly, I drove towards one of the men in the group, one whose face had been destroyed by a gunshot wound, turned into a mask of bone splinters. He just stared up at me as I approached. I kept moving forward slowly as I passed right through him. By the time that I had gotten a few dozen feet up, I turned around and saw that they were all gone. We had come onto the M56 by this point, and the whole truck vibrated horribly, shaking on the loose dirt and stones that comprised the road. I looked over at Yakov for a moment, wondering if he was pulling my leg. "Haven't you ever seen anything?" he asked me. "Well, I have, but not ghosts," I said. "Not the ghosts of Stalinism." I opened a fresh packet of cigarettes, taking one out and lighting it. I rolled down the window slightly. The bitterly cold wind began to whip into the truck, raising goosebumps all over my body. A cold wave of dread went down my spine, but for another reason, I didn't want to think of the story, and yet I told it anyway. It was winter, very cold just like now. I was driving down the M56 and found a car on the side of the road. Its hazards were on and its engine was not running. We never turn off our engines here in the winter because they won't start again in the freezing cold. Not at -60 or -70 with the wind chill. I instantly knew that the driver was in trouble. I pulled the truck over and got out. I examined the car and saw that the windows were smashed, shards of broken glass all over the seats and floor. And the driver's seat, it looked like it was covered in blood. And yet, no driver. I checked under the car and looked in the nearby forest, shining my flashlight through the trees. I called out for the driver, asking if he was hurt. For a long moment, no one answered me, and then I heard it. An answer, very faint but with each of the words still recognizable. "Please," it said, "I'm hurt. Come deeper into the woods and help me." Its voice did not sound normal. At first I wondered if it was just the voice of an injured man, but it had a hissing quality, a low, gurgling tone. I tried to think fast and simply called out a question. "Did you get in a car crash?" I asked. "What happened?" The voice came back again after a few long seconds of silence, and it just said the same thing in the same identical cadence and speed, as if a recording played in the woods on repeat. At that point, I decided that I would leave immediately. Something felt wrong with the situation. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my intuition screamed at me that something didn't add up. I turned to go, and on the other side of the road I saw, well, something. I'm not sure what it was. It was like a man but hairless. Its skin shrunken and pale, totally bleached white against its bones. It looked starved, its knees knobby, its legs just consisting of bones wrapped with skin like white sticks. Standing there totally naked without any sex organs, without eyebrows, its nose and ears missing. I wondered if it was a human at all. Now looking back on it, I know that it was not. Its eyes looked like shining orbs of pure blackness, huge pools of liquid black that stared at me, unblinking. And then it opened its mouth, showing many twisted and crooked yellow teeth. "Please, I'm hurt," it said, never changing its expression. It sounded like a recording, and I heard the same words behind me coming from the forest. "Please," another one said, maybe only 10 feet behind me from the sound. I ran towards my truck and I heard footsteps behind me, at least 2 pairs and maybe more. I didn't look back. I ran for my life and flung open the door. Just as I was closing it, a hand grabbed my leg. I shrieked, trying over and over again to close the door. I kept slamming against the thin, long white hand that had me. Eventually it let go, and I threw the truck into gear and got out of there. When I looked back, I saw dozens of pairs of black eyes staring at me, unblinking. After we had told our stories, I drove on in silence for an hour, only the soft pattering of snow against the truck breaking the monotony. I considered putting on some music but then decided against it. Yakov broke the silence after what felt like a very long time. "My grandfather died here, you know," he said. "The M56. He died building it. Sent to the gulags because one of his neighbors had a grudge against him over a land dispute. His neighbor went to the secret police and told them my grandfather was hoarding food, and it said that Stalin should be killed. Of course, none of that was true, but during those days, a grudge was good enough to guarantee you a death sentence. I remember them coming at night, 2 men in long black overcoats with bowler hats on their heads, fashionably angled to the left. They barely spoke. My grandfather answered the door. They said they had a few words for him, and then he was gone. I was in the kitchen with my grandmother, and by the time that I left, I only found an open door in the autumn night outside. I looked around, hoping to see my grandfather just smoking his pipe or sitting out on the porch, but I never saw him again. We never got his body back, and I only found out that he had died because of one of his fellow prisoners ended up surviving. He lived in the same town as me, and when he came back after 5 years in the gulags, he told me that my grandfather would never return. He told me that he had a message for me, that my grandfather loved me, he would always be with me, and that I should be strong. I cried for a long time. The townsman said my grandfather had collapsed one day while working in the winter, his body unable to deal with the constant sub-zero temperatures and starvation anymore. A guard came over and shot him dead in the head, and then they kept on building the road, throwing dirt and stones over his body. Soon the townsman said that he was buried under the road, next to a dozen other bodies that had died during work that day. I think maybe that's why the ghost had called out to me here. I never wanted to work as a driver on this road, but this is the only road leading north to Yakutsk, and I had very few other job options. Yet knowing that I drove over my grandfather's body every time that I drove the truck made me want to, I don't know, get revenge or even destroy the road itself. I just don't know. He stopped. My heart was racing, and I wondered how much he knew about me. Strangely enough, my grandfather had also been in the gulags, but not as a prisoner. He had guarded them and likely shot them and tortured them as well, like all of the guards in that place. I never knew my grandfather, and he died of a heart attack before I was born, and yet I shared the same last name, and my parents even said that I looked just like him, with gray eyes, high cheekbones, and thick wavy black hair. I had a narrow and angular face and a thin muscular body, the same build as him as well. I was told that we could have been twins. I looked in the rearview mirror, seeing my own face and the face of my own grandfather, like another face glimpsed behind a mask. I saw headlights approaching behind us. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming that it was just another driver on his way to deliver goods. But they drove far too fast for the conditions. With the snow, the rocks, and the unstable nature of the road itself, I felt a sense of unease at the dangerous speed at which the driver had approached. I changed the subject quickly, not wanting to talk about my family's past. "I think we're being followed," I said. Yakov spun his head, his eyes widening as he stared at the twin beams behind us. "They're going far too fast," he said, and then I saw it. Ahead of us was a totaled car, a rusted heap of metal without windows. The front driver's side looked smashed in as if it hit a tree or a large stone. The snow had already filled the interior, covering the seats and upholstery, and I barely saw it in time. I immediately started slowing down, knowing that a truck loaded with this much weight would take much longer than a usual car to stop. "Someone rolled this out here," I said. "I think this is an ambush." Just saying the words made my breath stop. I quickly tried to calculate our odds. I was grateful that I had Yakov and that he was armed. I reached under my seat and pulled out my pistol. "Do you have any weapons?" By now the headlights had gone from pinpricks to dull moon-like orbs in the snow, and I was rapidly slowing the truck so I wouldn't hit the car barricaded across the road, trying to keep moving so that I wouldn't slide off the road. Yakov quickly undid his bulging pack and reached through, looking for something and then frowning. And then he smiled, pulling his hand up and showing me a Makarov pistol. "I thought you said that you had a Makarov," I said. "Okay, whatever, I don't care." I looked closer at it. It was one of the oldest guns that I had ever seen, outside of a museum or a collection. The Makarov came to somewhat of a point near the barrel, narrowing in a curve at the end. It had a wooden hand grip, deeply worn by handling over the decades, and the metal had tarnished and turned a dark color. But as a whole, it still looked like a beautiful gun and an antique for sure. I wondered whether it actually fired. This gun from maybe 70 or 80 years ago. I hoped for our sake that it did. The lights had nearly reached us by now, and I had managed to stop the truck fully about 30 feet away from the barricaded car. It was the farthest away that I could manage under the conditions. I wanted room to back up or turn around or to accelerate and run over bandits if it came to that. I could probably smash the car out of the way of my truck if it were life or death. At least, so I hoped at the time. Looking back now, all these years later, I realize how naive I was at that moment. I saw men approaching out of the woods, hooded and covered from head to toe in black. Each had guns. The truck behind us had stopped. I saw a Toyota pickup truck extremely old and rusted. I saw that it had 3 sets of tires, 2 in the back, a dually. It looked modified as many cars in Russia are. Yet with 6 tires and no load to carry, it could move across the M56 at a speed greater than my own. I certainly could not run it unless I shot 1 or 2 of the tires out and slowed them down enough for me to find help. This area was deserted, but there were very small towns of nomads or natives in the region. 4 men got out of the pickup truck, each carrying a rifle. We were hopelessly outmatched here. I wondered if we would die. I doubted it, but really, what did I know about bandits? Perhaps our bones would simply join the hundreds of thousands of others who had died here. Perhaps they too would become a part of the road. "Get out!" The man in front screamed at us. Covered in a ski mask, I could only see his eyes, but they looked bleary and unfocused. His gaze kept flickering from us to the woods, and then around the area, and then returned back to me. I wondered if these men were all drunk. Very likely. If so, it may be easier to fight them off. I looked over at Yakov, who sat in his seat, trembling slightly, the gun in his hand. He looked at me, and I could see the terror that I felt reflected in his eyes. "Should we fight?" he asked desperately. I had no idea. This had never happened before. I had only heard stories, but... "Get out now or we shoot." The man screamed at us, breaking my thoughts. "Yes, we must fight," I said softly, as if the man outside could hear me. "They might kill us anyway. I'm not taking that chance. At least if we fight, we might be able to keep our fates in our hands alone. These men are likely drunk and not very accurate with their guns. We might have the advantage there." I looked over at the man in front, seeing him raise his gun and aim it at me. I ducked down, and a minute later, a bullet flew through the driver's side door. The crack of it shattered the otherwise muffled sounds of the blizzard. I felt cold air rush into the car through the hole. I rolled down my window while still ducking down on my seat, praying to God for help. I saw Yakov duck down as well, shaking like a leaf, his hands trembling badly. I sat up quickly, aiming and firing at the man in front. He stood there, his gun pointed down, talking to the other man. The shot hit him in the chest and he dropped, screaming. I saw splatters of blood and the pure white snow around him, little islands of red and an eternally white landscape. Shooting a gun in such a confined space made my ears ring, and for a moment I couldn't hear anything. I saw that the rest of the men had met in a circle when I shot him, both the ones from the forest and the ones from the pickup truck. It would make it easier to pick them all off one by one, or so I hoped anyway. I counted 7 more men to kill or disable, yet I hoped that if I killed a few, the rest would flee. They wanted easy targets and quick money, not men with guns who shot back. They all raised their guns to fire into the truck, swearing at us and yelling for us to surrender or die, when a shrill, ear-splitting sound suddenly came out of the forest. They looked away, their guns still pointed at us, their fingers on the triggers. I heard them babbling to each other in panicked, low voices, and they all began to run in unison back towards their pickup truck. They didn't even give us a backwards glance, or try to grab the body of their fallen comrade. They ran for their lives as if they had heard that sound before and they knew exactly what it was. I had no idea, however. I thought some strange Siberian animal would come flying out of the woods, some species that I had never seen before. But this seemed far better than a group of armed men. "Oh, thank God," I said. "They're leaving. Now we just need to push this car out of the road and we can get the heck out of here." Yakov nodded, still looking nervous and still holding his gun tightly. "What do you think that was?" he asked. I shrugged, apathetic. Probably just an animal," I said. "These people around here, they're superstitious. They think the boogeyman is." But at that moment I saw not a monster, but a child fleeing out of the woods. It was a little Siberian girl no more than 7 or 8, her facial features a mixture of Asian and white, reminding me of the Buryats that I had known, an ethnic minority in the region. She had a look of pure and utter terror on her face that told me that this was no animal chasing her. I quickly opened my door, running out into the freezing winter. Because this was a Japanese truck, the driver's side was on the right, making me closer to her than Yakov. "Little girl," I said, "what are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere? You'll freeze to death. Were you with those men? Are they your family? Did they kidnap you?" She looked shell-shocked, her eyes widening as she saw me. "I was kidnapped, yes," she said, "but not by any man. Please, sir, get me out of here. My twin sister is still back at the hut. She needs help. That thing is going to eat her." And then she put her face against my chest and cried, "It was the Baba Yaga. She's real, please. I don't want to be eaten." I grabbed the hysterical, screaming girl by the hand and began to pull her towards the truck. At first she hesitated, and then she began to run ahead of me, flinging herself into the cab and looking back out with huge dark eyes, like a gopher peeking out of its hole. That shrill, hateful shrieking from the woods had nearly reached me by this point. I couldn't make out any words in it. It seemed like just guttural cries of fury and hunger. I began to back up towards the truck, my pistol still raised, refusing to turn my back on anything that sounded like that. And then I saw the silhouette, breaking through the trees. At first, I thought it was a polar bear, this looming shadow that snapped solid branches aside like they were twigs. But instead I saw a woman standing over 8 feet tall, with mottled gray skin and a wrinkled, gaunt face. One of her eyes looked pure white as if covered in a cataract. Her other had a strikingly pure blue iris, with a deep, large pupil staring out from the middle, roving over the landscape before focusing on me. Her nose stuck out like a beak, sharp and curving, a few inches long. On her neck I saw a necklace, holding the fingers of children, dozens of them, some rotted to bones, others fresh and still dripping blood. She saw me, looked at the gun and then at my face and smiled. "You don't need to die too, friend," she said in a sickly, choking voice. A trickle of blood coming from her mouth and rolling down her chin as she spoke. "Give me the girl and you can leave in peace. What's mine is mine." I didn't even respond but simply fired, aiming at her chest. She fell back, screaming again, and I turned and ran towards the truck, slamming the door and starting the engine. The pickup truck had gone, and I couldn't even see its lights in the distance anymore. I started to go forward, slowly pushing the car aside with my truck, yet I couldn't get it to budge more than a few inches, as it seemed to sink down into the snow. I tried reversing, but I couldn't get the momentum on the slippery ice, as the road sloped downwards at an angle towards the right side. I didn't have enough clearance to try going forwards either. I was stuck, and to make things worse, I looked outside the window and saw the Baba Yaga was gone. Only a small puddle of black blood marked the spot where she had lain. While conditions seemed bad right now with the truck stuck like it was, I gave thanks that at least the engine started without issue. At times it got so cold in Siberia that the engines would fail to start. The temperature had started to increase, however, and outside the wind had died down. The snow had stopped, and looking at the thermometer that I kept on the outside of the truck, I saw that it was only -5 degrees Fahrenheit now. I cursed, putting on many layers while I sat in the truck driver's seat, the little girl sitting between me and Yakov on an empty bucket that she had turned upside down. She didn't seem affected by the cold at all. She had probably grown up in far worse. "What are you doing?" the girl said with widening eyes, watching me. I looked at her, shaking my head. "Obviously we have to go get your sister," I said. "No," she said. "I'm not going back there, never. I will never go back to that place." She started to cry. "The legs, the fence, the ovens, the cages. You have no idea how horrible it is." "Calm down," I said. "You have to lead us back towards the hut. You probably won't have to go in. We just need to get your sister and come back, and then we can leave." "What's your name?" "Irina," she said. "That's a very pretty name," Yakov said. "My name is Yakov, and this is Nikolai. We're the good guys. We can fight off that witch and bring your sister home. If we do nothing, your sister will die. You know that." Irina nodded, wiping her eyes. Bundled up in her layers of clothing with a fur jacket on the outside, she looked almost like a little Eskimo sitting here in my truck. I repressed the crazy urge to laugh at the image, remembering what was happening. "Let's do this," I said. getting out of the truck. I grabbed more ammo from the glove box and saw Yakov grabbing some bullets from the satchel of random goods that he carried around with him in a leather skin. He left the rest of his possessions in the truck, folding the leather carefully back over them and tying it with a cord. It felt eerie, like the dawn before a major battle. I had goosebumps all over my body and not just from the cold. The idea of going up against an infamous witch, a child-eating monster, well, it didn't raise my confidence. Though this happened years ago, I still remember that terrible feeling, as if everything had been leading up to this point and now everything stood still watching. I had heard legends of Baba Yaga growing up, how Satan had taken 12 women who were murderers and criminals, thrown their bodies in a pot together, mixed it up, and came out Baba Yaga. Of course, I scoffed at such myths now that I was older, but seeing her there had made me question many things. Irina went out first, not minding the cold at all, her breath coming out in steamy plumes. Yakov and I had flashlights from the truck, jumping down behind her. Their light came out dimly, but it gave enough illumination on the white snow to see. The clouds had started to part and the moon had come out in the sky, looking down on us like a single blind eye, like the cataract-ridden eye of Baba Yaga that I had seen before. As we started walking across the M56 and into the woods, that shrill gurgling shriek came ringing out again. I knew Baba Yaga was close, likely even watching us. She might attack at any moment. We walked further down the trail, a winding deer trail only a couple of feet wide, with branches that would smack me in the face and rocks to trip over every few steps. Just as I had turned to Yakov to say that we may have lost her, she attacked. I saw a blur and then an intense pain in my side as she tackled me, knocking me quickly to the snowy ground. I kept a death grip on my gun, snacking my head against a tree trunk, and the world went white. I drifted in and out of consciousness for a few moments, or perhaps it was longer. Time got strange. As if from a great distance, I heard gunshots and more screaming, and then my vision started to return and I focused. I saw Yakov crouched on the ground, holding his left hand tightly. I saw a fountain of blood running over his gloves, staining the snow in strange droplets and splotches. I tried to sit up, but a lightning bolt of pain seared my back. I groaned, raising my hand to my head. I felt something sticky on my scalp, and pulling my hand back, I saw that it was covered in blood. It felt warm and wet, running down from the right side of my scalp and showing no signs of slowing. I felt nauseated and weak for a second, seeing all that blood, how it stained my clothes and the snow below me. I took a few deep breaths in and out, slowly concentrating and steadying myself. My hand still trembled, and my legs felt like jelly as I tried to stand, but I leaned against the tree and let the waves of weakness and nausea pass by. Yakov wasn't doing much better. He was hyperventilating, staring in shock at his spurting hand. His left thumb looked like it was mostly or entirely gone. We've got to put pressure," I said slowly, gulping air, "on the wound, and ice and snow." I began to tear a strip from one of my shirts and then walked slowly over to Yakov on unsteady legs. I looked into his eyes. They looked dark and tortured, and he quickly looked away, tears forming in his eyes from the shock and pain. Irina sat next to him on a log, and she watched in horror, looking away whenever she noticed the blood. "Let's do this," I said. "Ready?" He nodded weakly. I pulled the strip of cloth around the hole where his thumb used to, running it around his hand in circles and tightening it. He screamed. I gave him a piece of wood to bite down on, and he pulled it even tighter. I saw teeth marks forming deep in the wood. A solid branch 1 inch in diameter I had snapped in half. His breath came in and out so fast that I thought for sure he would pass out, but he kept with me. Soon I had pressure on the wound and the bleeding had slowed considerably. I repeated the process with my head, wrapping more strips of cloth around the bloody scalp wound and pulling. I gritted my teeth, but the pain wasn't nearly as bad as I thought, except for the crushing migraine. More than anything, I just felt weak and waves of nausea kept assailing me. Splotches would rise in my vision, black dots that seemed to precede passing out. But I would sit down quickly, and after a few minutes, I had regained most of my strength. "Let's keep going," I said weakly. Irina stood next to Yakov, looking petrified. "I don't want to go," Irina said stubbornly. "Please don't make me." "Irina," I sighed, "your sister might die if we turn around. We have no choice." "But I'm too scared," she said. "You have no idea how bad it is there. You can't even imagine." But after a few minutes of convincing, she continued to lead us. A ragtag group of injured men and a child, limping through the thick snow in the freezing cold. We walked for an hour in silence, the little girl following her tracks, looking for landmarks that she had passed when she had escaped the first time. She had grown up in the woods most likely, and her family must have taught her much. I was worried about freezing to death, but then I started to notice that my body was growing warmer. I thought perhaps it was simply the first sign of hypothermia. And yet as she walked, I noticed changes in the forest. It had actually gotten warmer. It wasn't just in my mind. Soon the snow had all gone. I looked around and noticed that all the trees were dead, their naked arms extending up to the sky. I had to take off a jacket and then a sweater too. I saw the others doing the same, sweating as it warmed up. A fog began to roll in, covering the whole area. "This is the space between the world of the living and the dead," Irina said in her sweet child's voice. It made the statement all the more horrible. "The hut is nearby. This is the border of her home." Through the mist, I swore that I could see faces appearing and disappearing, the horror-stricken visages of children and eternally grinning skulls. Soon we came to a clearing. All the trees had stopped in a large circle, a few 100 feet in diameter. In horror, I looked at what lay beyond. A fence surrounded the property made of children's bones. It extended high up at least 20 feet, countless arm and leg bones stacked on top of each other, bound together with twine and braced with more bones, attached vertically against the others. I saw no gaps bigger than an inch and no way to climb it. Looking at the top, I saw pieces of sharpened bone sticking up, like some razor wire from hell. Irina shook at my side and she grabbed my hand suddenly, her small body exuding a strength that seemed beyond her physical abilities. I smiled down at her, smoothing her long black hair with my right hand. I felt almost entirely recovered from my earlier concussion, though my head still pounded in time with the beat of my heart. I wished that I had brought some aspirin. "How do we get in?" Irina asked, taking off another sweater and hanging it over her shoulder. I had absolutely no idea. "Let's look around," I said. We began to circle the fence, walking along the circumference of the clearing. I could see a hut beyond through the small gaps. After a minute, we came to the gate and it stood 20 feet tall, like the rest of the fence, and it would be almost impossible to scale. Unlike the rest of the fence, the gate had been fashioned entirely from skulls. I saw all the small skulls stacked on top of another. As I imagined how many children had died to build just this macabre gate, a feeling of sickness and dread washed over me. Sticking out the front of it in the exact center, I saw a larger skull. It looked like that of a man. In its open mouth, I saw a silver keyhole. In anger, I tried shaking the gate, and it came swinging open, totally silent. "It's open," Yakov said, amazed. I looked at him. "This feels like a trap," I said. He nodded. Irina hid behind Yakov now, not wanting to look at the eternally grinning skull stacked in front of her. bound together with some sort of invisible glue. I looked through the gate at the hut beyond, my breath caught in my throat. It stood on two massive legs. The feet looked like those of a chicken, but the legs loomed 10 feet above the ground, where they somehow attached to the hut, holding it up suspended in the air. They were skeletal, all the flesh and muscle long ago wasted away. "Are those chicken legs?" Yakov asked, his voice low. I felt eyes on me. I looked back into the forest, but I saw no one. "Who the heck knows?" I asked. "But where do you get a chicken that's the size of an elephant, or even bigger?" "From hell?" he asked, and I laughed. "You think they have massive chickens down there just going around and pecking at all the hell grains," I said. He smiled. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Let's do this." We began to walk forwards into the clearing. I could see the circular hut more clearly now. An inner light burned, sending out a fiery red glow through the windows. Unlike the rest of this horrible place, it looked like the hut was actually built of wood and stone. It had a quaint look, like the hut of an ancient serf. The top of it met in a point with thatch and twigs carefully aligned to form a rounded dome. The windows were lined with stones. Trunks of dead trees formed the main construction material, pressed one against the next and stacked vertically in a perfect circle. They had their branches cut off and their bark stripped, the wood ground down to a smooth and uniform texture. "My sister is in there," Irina whispered. "Please don't make me go back. Please, you don't know what they do in there, what she does in there." I grabbed her hand. "We can't leave you behind. I think we're being watched. I'm sorry, but you have to come with us." She put her head down, looking like a beaten dog. She trudged alongside us slowly as we examined the property, but we saw no sign of anyone. I sighed deeply. "All right, let's go inside," I said. "Let's find out what horrors await us in that hut." As we walked forward, I heard the gate click close behind us. I turned and looked, but I saw no one. It seemed as if it had closed on its own. I saw to my horror that I would need a key to get out as well as in. Another skull, its mouth open and filled with a silver locking mechanism, stuck out on this side as well. The metal in its mouth made it look like it was choking, the eternally gaping mouth like it was screaming. I turned away, focusing on the task at hand, hoping I would survive the next few minutes. The space around the hut looked totally dead. I didn't see a single blade of grass or even a weed to mar the smooth, black earth. It looked so dark in the shadows of the forest that the legs in the hut seemed to hover over an abyss. The door, painted a blinding white, contrasted heavily with the rest of the stocked logs and twigs that composed the ancient-looking hut. A set of rickety wooden stairs led up to the door. I went first, and there was no railing, and with each step I took, I was afraid that it would fall right through the stairs. But they were stronger than they looked and nailed tightly to the beams underneath. Without hesitation, I flung the door open and saw a nightmare laying beyond. A child's body roasted on a spit over the raging fire in the fireplace, giving off a smell of cooking meat and wood smoke that mixed with the rosemary, parsley, and other herbs sprinkled over the body. I saw lampshades made of human skins, covering black candles that flickered and sputtered as the wind came in from outside. In the corner, a little girl crouched in a cage that was only big enough for a dog. She couldn't stand up and cried constantly. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Please help me," she screamed. "She'll be back any moment. Get me out of here." She looked like the spitting image of Irina, and I wondered if they were identical twins. Yakov grabbed a knife from his pocket, going over to the cage and looked closely at the lock. He flicked it open and began feverishly pulling at the ancient-looking padlock that held the cage closed. It didn't seem nearly as secure as a modern deadbolt, and I wondered how many years the old witch had possessed it. I walked over to the window and looked outside, and my heart jumped in my throat. Outside, I saw Baba Yaga getting out of what looked like a flying pestle as it slowly lowered itself toward the ground. It stood about 4 feet tall, enough to hide Irina inside it if it came to it. The wood looked beautiful, like smooth mahogany, perfectly fit together without cracks or gaps of any kind. It had strange runes burnt into the exterior. The writing was not Russian or any Slavic language that I knew. She had a mortar as tall as herself. She had her hands wrapped around the dark wood of the mortar, using the flaring wide end of the bottom to push herself up and over the wall of the pestle. She had extremely thin legs like those of a skeleton. They looked like 2 iron bars wrapped in skin. I looked close through the window, squinting to try to make out every detail. I wondered if she used that mortar and pestle to grind up the bodies of children, to prepare their bodies for a meal. I saw dark stains on the bottom of the mortar, dark red and soaked deeply into the wood. I figured that answered my question. She put the mortar back inside and then turned and looked directly inside the hut. Her eyes met mine, one blind and staring, one filled with intelligence and fury. I ducked away, hoping that she hadn't seen me. Hurry up, I said, turning to go help Irina and Yakov. She's coming, she's got a flying barrel too. I saw they nearly had the lock broken by this point. It was fairly flimsy and ancient looking, and Yakov had a folding knife which he used to pry it loose. Realizing there was nothing that I could do to speed up the process, I ran back towards the window. Baba Yaga was gone. She wasn't standing next to her mortar and pestle anymore. In fact, her mortar and pestle were gone too. A moment later, a deafening cacophony exploded across the hut as the roof collapsed inwards, covering us with thin branches, thatch, and straw. I found myself on the floor, unable to remember where I was for a moment. The cold steel of the gun was still gripped tightly in my hand, and then I heard crying and screaming, and it all came rushing back to me. I pushed some boards off of myself, feeling blood run down over my forehead. I felt weak. The fireplace on the other side of the room gave off some light. I saw the ceiling had collapsed, and as I looked up, I saw the full moon illuminating the cracked and ragged edges of the ruined roof. A gunshot rang out very close by, and I heard a guttural cry of pain and surprise. I ran towards the sound, and after pushing a few beams from a section of collapsed wall to the side, I made a path towards Yakov and Baba Yaga. Yakov stood only a few feet away and had just shot her in the neck at point-blank range. Thick black blood ran down her tattered rags of clothing, staining the coarse brown cloth and making it cling to her skin. She screamed in rage, opening her mouth wide and showing many sharp yellow teeth, running forwards towards him and tackling him. I pushed some more rubble out of the way and ran forwards, the gun still clenched in my hand. Baba Yaga used her shark-like teeth to bite Yakov over and over in a space of mere seconds. He squealed like a pig being slaughtered, an inhuman wail that made me want to cover my ears and look away. Without thinking, I raised the gun and fired. The shot hit her in the shoulder and came out of her chest. With a grunt, she fell sideways onto the ruined floor. I saw with horror that the wound in her neck was stitching itself closed before my eyes. Whatever dark magic had made this creature had clearly given her superhuman healing abilities. I wondered how we should kill her. If possible, whether multiple gunshots to the head would do it or not. I had a creeping suspicion that it would not be so easy. I saw Yakov writhing on the floor, his face a mess of torn flesh. His nose missing, and pieces of his cheeks, lips, and forehead had deep slices, leaving flaps of skin hanging over his face. I started to run to him, but he shook his head vigorously. "Get the girls," he said through a mouth full of blood, choking, his sounds coming out strange, maybe due to the bites that had split his lips and taken part of the top one. Instead, I began to walk over to Baba Yaga, planning to put the pistol to her head point blank and pull the trigger. But the ruins of the thick hut door creaked open at that moment, and I turned, stunned at what I saw. Across the pile of torn beams and splintered boards, I saw the creatures that I had told Yakov about, the ones that I had seen next to the empty car stained with blood. They had hidden in the woods saying, "Please help me," over and over in a perfect, parrot-like fashion. And now they had come, the same pure black eyes, thin bodies and sheet white skin. They looked like cancer patients, without a shred of fat on their bodies, totally hairless and alien, lacking sex organs or nipples, ears or noses. But they were much faster than their emaciated condition would suggest, and they began to rush in, pushing some of the rubble aside and approaching where Yakov and I stood. I looked from Baba Yaga to the newcomers quickly, my mind racing. She looked up, a sensation of pain in her one good eye, the other flat and white, but her face lit up when she saw who had just arrived. "My servants, my sweet children," she said in a deep and cooing voice. "You knew your mother was in trouble and came, didn't you? You always know, always. That makes you so beautiful to me. You'll always be mine." I turned back to Baba Yaga, meaning to finish her off, but she sat up rapidly and grabbed my wrist, twisting. I cried out in pain and the gun went flying, settling under debris and rubble. I smelled smoke and to my horror, realized the fireplace had ignited some of the ruined beams. Baba Yaga pushed me back and went flying into the wall, my wrist swelling and burning. In the corner I saw Irina helping her sister out of the cage. The fire caught the old brittle wood as if it were soaked in gasoline, and I saw with horror that soon it would cut off the escape route for Irina and her sister. Groaning, I got up quickly. Yakov had reloaded and began shooting at the creatures that approached him. Baba Yaga stood up slowly, still dripping black blood on the floor, looking much weaker than before. I counted that as a blessing, though I didn't think that it would last. Whatever dark magic kept this monster alive was more powerful than a flesh wound, apparently. I had to choose between helping Irina or getting the gun, and I saw no choice. I dived into the rubble where I had last seen it, feeling splinters and nails poking into my skin. A few pierced my arms and legs through my clothing, and I felt sticky trickles of blood soaking them. I ignored the pain of my hand, the throbbing migraine that I still had from the concussion, and now this new insult to my body. The adrenaline helped, but I knew that if I survived this, I would be sore and cut for weeks. The black-eyed creatures ran at me, and one grabbed my leg as I ducked and felt around furiously in the dark for the pistol. The fire kept spreading, giving me slightly more light through the crooked beams and collapsed roof, and I saw a glint of metal in the dim illumination, just as the creatures had pulled me out. I grabbed frantically, feeling the cold grip of the gun against my hand. Turning around quickly, I fired without aiming, shooting point blank at the creatures standing there. One got hit in the chest, a splatter of the same black blood as Baba Yaga's staining the wall behind it. I missed the other one, and it lunged, snapping with its twisted yellow teeth, going straight for my throat or face. Without thinking, I fired again, and the shot went through its nose holes, disintegrating the front of its face, and sending a dark spray of blood out behind it. It fell on me. I struggled, pushing the body off. All I could smell was smoke now, and I began to choke and sputter. I looked around wildly, but the smoke had grown thick, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I looked for Irina and her sister moving towards where I had last seen them, but quickly gave up and started calling out. "Irina, get out of here now, we have to go," I said. I felt a small hand thrust into mine, and thinking that it was Irina, I pulled, running towards the door. I ran straight into Yakov, who was choking on the smoke. I looked into his eyes and gasped. His face was a mask of blood. Only two dark eyes peered out from the destroyed flesh below. He kept spitting blood as he coughed. Without thinking, I pushed him towards the door, continuously pulling the little girl behind me. More creatures stood there, but we shot the ones on the stairs and the others retreated away, galloping on all fours like some strange animal. They looked back with hatred, their eyes black and shining. They ran towards the gate, which was now open. I wondered if one of them had a key. Turning around, I saw the hut had turned into a blazing inferno. To my horror, I saw that I did not hold Irina's hand, but her twin sister's instead. "Where's Irina?" I asked, panicked, and then the screaming started from the hut. The floor began to collapse, chunks of molten wood falling between the dead skeletal chicken legs that held up the hut. Like something from a nightmare, I saw Baba Yaga stumbling out, her skin melting, her hair on fire, her one good eye still peering out from the mask of burning flesh. Her shrill, ear-splitting shriek echoed through the forest around us, and I heard another quieter scream start coming from the hut. It sounded like a little girl. Without thinking, I began to push Yakov and Irina's sister out of the gate, praying for Irina's safety, but knowing that the only thing she could hope for was a quick death from suffocation. No one could survive that inferno. She was right when she said that we shouldn't have come here, but I had forced her and now she was dying or dead. She ran out into the woods, following the trail back to the truck. Yakov kept stumbling and falling. "I can't go on much longer," he said. "I think I'm dying. She really did a number on me. I feel lightheaded and I think that I might pass out soon." "That's just the blood loss," I said, reassuring him but not believing it. "Once we get you to a hospital, you'll be fine. You just need a few stitches. It's not as bad as it looks." He laughed, a sarcastic and bitter sound. "Don't lie to the dying," he muttered. And just as the truck came into sight, the black-eyed creatures came galloping silently out of the woods on all fours, a dozen of them surrounding us. They didn't blink or show any emotion, but as if a signal had been given, they swarmed us all at once. I began shooting, having refilled the chamber with bullets from my pocket, but there were too many. I cleared a path towards the truck, shooting 5 in the chest and aiming for center mass. Yakov began to fire, but many of his shots missed as blood streamed over his face and eyes, and soon we were both out of bullets. I grabbed the little girl and ran towards the truck as Yakov held his place, roaring with bloodlust and excitement, pulling out a folding knife from his pocket. "Come on," he screamed, but he just smiled. "Goodbye, friend," he said as the creatures jumped on him, and he began stabbing and fighting in his last moments, cutting at their throats and faces as they ate him alive. I took Irina's sister to a hospital and told the police about everything that had happened. They looked at me like I was a madman. The little girl corroborated my story, but they just dismissed it as the imagination of a child. Nonetheless, they went out to the site and they found Yakov's body. They ruled that he had been mauled by animals. There were, after all, many bears in that area. They also followed our footsteps into the woods but said they found no hut, no fire, and no clearing. They said the footsteps just stopped suddenly, as if we had been abducted by a UFO. The hut had gone and so had Baba Yaga. After that day, I finished my drive, sold my truck, and made plans to move out of Russia forever. I had seen enough. But still, I wonder what else lies in those woods. What other secrets remain to be found? I'm not a bad man. Here I sit, alone in the dark, in the snow, freezing to death. Well, I guess I'm not technically alone. There's a body beside me. He hasn't been any real company for a while, especially since he isn't giving off heat anymore. I really wish I would have known what was coming this morning when I woke up. I would have called in sick and spent my day snuggled under a blanket watching TV. Unfortunately, that wouldn't have worked either. There's no way my wife would have let me enjoy taking a day off. Isn't it amazing how somebody who sits around and does nothing but complain all day can magically find tons of things that I need to do anytime that I take a day off, all at the same time, complaining that I'm not working hard enough for bringing home enough money. I need to take a cleansing breath just thinking about it. Well, that's why I went to work today, oblivious of what was to come. When I started out in Pennsylvania with an empty truck and drove south to pick up my load of parts from the warehouse, I had no idea what was coming. The weather forecast said partly cloudy with a chance of some snow. That was the understatement of the year. I should have been a weatherman, or you don't have to be good at your job. And in fact, people expect you to suck at your job. Just stand in front of the green screen and look pretty. But anyway, I started to see some flurries about a half hour into my trip that normally took 2 hours. But today, it would be anything but normal. I got to the interstate and headed south. Before I made it to the Maryland state line, the snow was sticking to the road. It was falling harder by the minute. I slowed down when visibility became near whiteout conditions. But the idiots around me were in too much of a hurry and were having none of that slowing down stuff. It wasn't long until there was a layer of slush on the road, but did the idiots slow down? Of course not. I was doing 45 by this point and the cars were flying around me. I came to a slight turn and it happened. One of the idiots passing me lost control. His car spun in the middle of the highway going much faster than me. The slippery conditions worked in his favor because he slid off the road and into the center section of grass. Of course, by that point, you couldn't see any grass. The snow was about 6 inches deep. The only thing keeping it from getting that deep on the road was us drivers that were too stupid to pull over. I had yet to see a snowplow. It's funny because there's been other times when a big snowfall was predicted, and the plows would be out hours ahead of time putting down some liquid concoction that was supposed to melt the snow. I didn't think that stuff worked, but that's just my opinion. After the first car spun out, I slowed down even more. Driving a box truck doesn't do great for traction, but I had one of the bigger older trucks that weighed a lot. It was one of the few times that I was happy to be stuck with this jalopy of a truck. As I slowed down, the second car flew around me and spun into the grass, and then a third and then a fourth. At this point, I was wondering when these idiots would run out of luck and slide in front of another vehicle, hopefully not mine, and cause a crash that would pile us all up because nobody could stop quickly at this point. Fortunately, I think the other drivers started getting the point and they slowed down. It was just in time too because we were approaching a big hill. Any other time, like when the road wasn't covered in this slippery white stuff, the hill was enough to make me and every other truck driver downshift and try to get a running start at it. With everybody already slowing down to try and stay on the road, we didn't have a chance. The bigger trucks in front of me tried to get a little speed up to make it to the top, but halfway up, the cars in front of them had to stop because of traffic. At that point, we were all done. Once the first truck had stopped, there was no way it was going any further. At least it wasn't moving forward. A few brave or stupid souls tried to get their truck further up the hill. I put my truck in park and watched. It was like rooting for a sports team. The truck would start spinning tires, but it would be moving forward inch at a time. I held my breath as I watched, thinking the truck would get going and be able to make it to the top of the hill. It would inch forward, tires spinning, and then it would lose all traction and slide back. Over and over this played out. The truck would inch forward, wheels spinning, make it a few feet, and then slide back further than where it had started. One time, the truck slid so much that it was headed for the car behind it. That car quickly threw it into reverse to make room before it was crushed by the out-of-control metal monster sliding toward it. So as that car slammed into reverse in a desperate attempt to not become a pancake, the car behind him threw it into reverse to avoid getting hit. As this group of cars headed toward me, I knew that there was nothing I could do. I held onto the wheel and I braced for impact. Fortunately, the truck regained control and was able to stop. He didn't make any more attempts to get up the hill after that. And once everything had stopped, except for the snow, several of the truck drivers got out and met up in the middle of the road, surrounded by the parking lot of cars that used to be a highway. We stood around and drank coffee from our thermoses as the other drivers hunkered down in their cars. We chit-chatted about where we were from and where we were going, along with the obvious topic of discussion, useless weathermen. I ended up exchanging email addresses with a nice driver from Michigan who also happened to be a writer. When the conversation came to a lull, I looked around at the scenery. The snow had reached nearly a foot, making the countryside quite beautiful. We seemed to be in a large area of trees with no houses at all. I mentioned this to one of the other drivers whose name was Luke, and he said that this was a large forest that the highway had cut through. He said there was a legend of a creature that lived in this forest that would appear from time to time and take vengeance for the destruction of his home. Where was its home? I said. Right here, Luke said. When they built the highway, they destroyed several caves that were on the mountainside. They blew it up to make the path for the road. Really? I said. Yeah, I drive locally and I remember when they were building this highway, there were several workers who went missing. Did they ever find them? Well, after a long search, they found pieces of them. Are you serious? I said. Yeah, dead serious, unfortunately. It was quite a scandal. There was a group who tried to get construction shut down, but there was already too much in motion to stop. I looked around at the massive cut that had been made into the mountain so the road could go through. Progress, I said. You can't stop it. I looked at the cars and trucks surrounding me that all sat unmoving, covered in snow. Well, sometimes you can stop it, I said, waving my arms around. He nodded. Mother Nature can do whatever she wants. I looked back at the long line of vehicles that extended as far as the eye could see, and there's not much that we can do about it. I saw the flashing yellow lights of the snowplow off in the distance and felt hope rising in me, but it fell right away when I saw the plow was stuck too. People couldn't move over enough to let the plow through. Looks like we might be here for a while, I said. He followed my eyes until he caught sight of the struggling plow. Yeah, you may be right, Luke said, shaking snow off of his coat. I'm gonna go back to my truck to warm up. I'll talk to you later. Unfortunately, I'll be here, I said, shaking snow off and heading back to my truck. I hopped inside and started up to get the heater going. The man in front of me turned and looked like I was about to run him over, but I reassured him by rubbing my hands together in front of the heater vent. I looked in my lunchbox and found a sandwich, some chips, a bag of almonds, and a few mini candy bars. Not knowing how long that I would be stuck here, I decided to ration my food. I nibbled on a few almonds and I drank a little water. I knew that was one resource that would be unlimited. Filling my water bottle with snow and melting it would keep me hydrated. It was nearly 11 in the morning, on a standard day, one where tons of slippery white goo didn't fall from the sky. I would have almost been to the warehouse. I'd better call the boss and let him know what's going on, I thought, pulling out my cell phone. He answered on the third ring. Hello? Hey boss, I figured I'd call and let you know that I won't be bringing in the load of parts anytime soon. Why not? It's the strangest thing. This white stuff started falling from the sky, and when it landed on the road, it made things all slippery. All right. Well, I'm sure it's snowing back at the base. Why would you even have to ask me that question? How far did you make it? I'm around 40 miles from the warehouse. You didn't even make it there. Well, I probably could have gone faster, but I decided that I like life. Okay, I got it. But if you're encouraging me to drive the company vehicle at unsafe speeds for conditions... I said I got it. There's no need to rub it in. When do you think you'll be getting back? At this point, there's a foot of snow on the road and the plows can't even get through. I have no idea what they're going to do. What are you going to do? Well, I figured I would call a cab and leave the truck here while I go home. What? I'm going to sit here and try to keep warm while I wait for them to plow us out. What do you think I'm going to do? I think you're going to keep giving me a hard time. Well, are you going home tonight? I'm already home, he said. As soon as the storm hit, I canceled all the runs and sent everybody home. Well, thanks for including me. I needed you to get the parts for tomorrow's run. And that worked out so well, I said sarcastically. You know what, I think I'm gonna go. Be safe, he said, and let me know when you get going. I hung up. I didn't need the heater for a while because I was still steaming from the conversation with my boss. He didn't even think to call me, I thought, because he knew that I would turn around instead of risking my life going and getting his precious parts. The thought lingered for a while as I leaned my head against the headrest and took a little nap. When I woke, the chill in the air made me start the truck to get warm again. I looked out over the endless throng of cars and trucks that were covered in snow with exhaust rising from their tailpipes. I looked at my watch. It was 4:37 in the afternoon. The sun would be going down soon, and the temperature would drop. At least the snow had let up. It was only basically flurrying now. While the truck was on, I plugged in my cell phone to charge. I didn't want to be without it in case I needed it. I closed my eyes again, not intending to fall asleep. When I opened them, it was dark. I sat up straight and panicked for a moment, thinking that I had fallen asleep at the wheel. In reality, I had, but the truck wasn't moving, so it wasn't as bad if I had been driving. I noticed taillights here and there where people were leaving them on, or if they were automatic. It lit up the mountain like a Christmas tree. It would have been quite beautiful if we weren't trapped in this prison of snow. I finished with my reverie and stretched in my seat. I was about to get out to go to the bathroom when I looked at the time. It was 9:40 at night. I looked at my phone and noticed that I had several voicemails. I didn't remember turning off the ringer, but I must have. I turned it back on and then typed in the password and listened to the first one. Daddy, where are you? Came Carolyn's voice. Please come home. Please call me. The next 5 messages were the same thing, each one growing in desperation. I sighed and called home. It didn't even ring once until Caroline answered. Daddy, where are you? Why aren't you home? When are you coming home? Well there, Pumpkin, I said. I'm okay, just stuck in traffic. Well, how long will you be stuck? I don't know, there's a lot of other people stuck in the same traffic as me. Why? Because of the snow. But it's not snowing here. Well, it's not snowing here either. Well then how can you be stuck? I'll explain when I get home, I said. Is Mommy around? Yes. Well, what is she doing? She's drinking stuff I'm not allowed to drink. Great. Let me talk to her. I love you, Pumpkin. I love you too. Here's Mommy. What do you want? She slurred. You to stop drinking would be nice. Hey, don't judge me. Where the heck are you anyway? What do you care? You've got your good friend Jack to keep you company. Don't get lost. If you made more money, I wouldn't have to stay at home and drink. Or you could get off your lazy butt and go get a job, and that would help out a lot. She hung up. I banged my head against the headrest. Once I stopped thinking about the wreck my life had become, I realized that I hadn't gone to the bathroom since this morning. I felt the urge come on quickly. I grabbed my phone and headed out into the white wilderness. The door was on its way shut when I whipped around and grabbed it. I reached in and took the keys out of the ignition and then locked the door. I made it 2 steps before I remembered. I unlocked and got back in the truck, reaching over to the glove compartment and grabbing a handful of napkins. I relocked the door and headed out. The taillights were few and far between now, but they still gave this horrible situation a festive glow. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started toward the side of the road. The snow was up to my knees and I had to trudge through to make a path to the closest trees. Once there, I squatted and let nature take its course. I tried to use as few napkins as possible to wipe, not knowing how many more times I would have to do this before we were rescued. As I followed my trail back toward the truck, I noticed a car a few spaces in front of my truck with its door hanging open. At first, I mentally shrugged, thinking that they had left the door open to find their way back to their car. But then I saw that the car was still running. I decided to investigate. I approached the car and saw that it was empty. There were tracks leaving the car and heading into the woods. They weren't the same as I had made during my trek to the woods. The snow was much more disturbed. It almost looked like somebody had crawled through the snow. Why would they do that? I thought. As I looked more closely at the path, I saw spots of red. I shone my light on them and they reminded me of blood. I turned my light towards the woods and saw a clear path into the tree line. And then a horrible thought hit me. They weren't crawling. They were being dragged. I trudged over to Luke's truck and banged on his door. After a minute, I saw his head appear in the window. "Oh, what the?" he said, wiping the sleep from his eyes. "I need your help," I said. Something about the way that I said it seemed to squash any objections that he may have had. Give me a minute," he said and disappeared into his truck. He soon reappeared and climbed down out of it. "Okay, you got me up. What's so important? Are the plows working their way up to us?" I looked back, realizing that I hadn't even thought about the plows and being rescued. I glanced back and saw the yellow flashing lights, but they were still miles away and moving at a snail's pace. No, I got up to take a bathroom break, and when I came back, I discovered something. I led him over to the car with the open door. "I found it like this," I said. "So, someone got up to take a piss. What's the big deal?" I leaned down and shined my light on the red spots. He leaned down and examined them. "Interesting, but not conclusive," he said. "Well, look at the path. What does that look like to you?" "It looks like somebody went into the trees. But look at my path walking into the trees," I said, shining my light towards the path. He turned on the light from his own phone and pointed it at the paths one at a time. "There is a difference. What's your point?" he said. "I think somebody was dragged into the woods." "But why?" he said, shooting me a curious look. "I don't know." He looked from me to the past, to the woods and back again. "What are you thinking?" he said. I shrugged. "Maybe somebody needs help." "And who do you think is going to help them?" Luke said, eyeing me dubiously. I looked at him and smiled. "Oh no," he said. "You're not dragging me into the forest in the middle of the night in knee-deep snow." "But what if somebody's really hurt? What if they've been attacked?" "All the more reason not to go." "You're kidding me, right?" "Look, man, I don't know you," he said. "I only met you today. How do I know you didn't drag somebody off as an excuse to get me out of the woods alone and do terrible things?" "Why would I do that?" "I have no idea. You're the psycho killer. How would I know how your twisted mind works?" "Come on," I said, giving him my most innocent look. "Do you hear the things that you're saying?" He looked from me to the trail to the car and then back to the plows. "All right, give me a sec, I'll go. But if you try anything, I'll kill you and leave you to die in the snow." I chuckled. "You'll kill me and then leave me to die." "Shut up," he said with a smile. "You know what I mean." "No, not really." Okay, if we're doing this, I need to go back to my truck first. Why? You'll see. He disappeared and returned a few minutes later, wearing a day glow vest and carrying a large flashlight, along with a baseball bat that had been sawed off partway up, making it around a foot shorter than a regular bat. What's that? I said. My deterrent. Deterrent against what? He shrugged. Theft, attack, property damage, you name it. I looked at my phone and realized that I had no deterrent. The thought suddenly struck me. I'm going into the woods alone with this person that I've just met, and he has a weapon. I have no idea if he dragged somebody off into the woods and killed them. Maybe we should get somebody else to go along with us, I said. He looked around. Like who? He said. You want to go around and wake everybody up, form a posse and storm the woods for somebody who might have just had a nosebleed as they were heading out to take a dump. Well, when you put it like that, I said, feeling stupid. Let's go, he said, pointing his flashlight towards the trail. We trudged through the snow following the trail. I strode through the untouched, knee-deep snow beside the path, so as not to disturb what might be evidence. I turned around and saw that he was walking right through the middle of the path. I stopped and stared at him. What are you doing? I said. What? It's easier this way, he said. A lot better than trudging through that deep stuff. I sighed and hung my head, and then I stepped into the path just like him. After a short time, I thought to myself, this is much easier, but I'm not telling him that. The wind picked up and started throwing snow around, making my protest moot and sending chills through me. We walked until we got to the tree line, and I paused and waited for him. Why'd you stop? He said. You've got the light. Why don't you go first? Because this is your little investigation. I was asleep in my truck when you dragged me out of here. But you've got the brighter light, I said. He grabbed my phone and replaced it with the big flashlight. Happy now? No, I thought. I stepped into the trees, flashing the light all around. The snow wasn't as deep because of the trees, making walking easier. The wind wasn't as strong under the trees either. After doing a quick look around, I refocused on the path. It still seemed like somebody was being dragged in a straight line, avoiding trees. There was a definite destination someone or something had in mind. That hadn't put my mind at ease. In fact, it made me nervous, which made me paranoid. Even though I kept the light aimed at the path, I found my eyes darting to the sides quite often in case something was about to attack. It never crossed my mind until now that we were heading right where it wanted its other victim. Essentially, we were delivering the next 2 courses of its meal, like we were door-dashing ourselves right to it. I paused for a moment and pretended to warm myself by rubbing my arms to hide the fact that I was shaking, and it had nothing to do with the weather. Why don't you lead for a... I turned to say, but he was gone. I shone the flashlight all around but found no sign of him. I backtracked on the path but saw no footprints other than my own. My mind flew in 1,000 directions. Where is he? Did whatever dragged the other person out here take him too? What do I do? Do I retrace my path back to the truck and sit there like nothing happened? And then I remembered. He has my phone. Panic grabbed me and dragged me down into despair. I spun around seeing nothing but trees and snow. I wasn't sure which way I had come and which way I was going. At that point, all I wanted to do was go back to the truck. I looked at the path and mentally flipped a coin to decide which way to go. Once I started out again, I kept glancing to the sides for anyone trying to sneak up on me. The trees seemed to go on forever. Several times I felt that I had made the wrong choice and decided to turn back. But I had dragged my friend out here and I had to find him. My feet were freezing even though I wore boots, and they weren't hunting boots and weren't suited for long treks in deep snow. Just as I was about to give up, the trees opened into a clearing and I saw the cave. The wind had picked up, but the trail was still visible for where somebody had been dragged. The path led right into the mouth of the cave. I froze on the spot. I had found what I was looking for, but now all I felt like doing was turning and running full speed away from it. My survival instinct had a serious discussion with my conscience about the benefits of self-preservation versus honor. In the end, self-preservation pulled out the big gun. Reason. I'm a truck driver, I thought. I'm not a hunter, a cop, or a survivalist. I turned to start back when I heard something. I paused and listened. It was coming from the cave. It was a song. As I listened, I realized exactly what it was. It was Metallica's All Nightmare Long, my ringtone. My mind slowly put two and two together. Luke has my phone and I hear my phone in the cave. Therefore Luke is in the cave. And if he's in the cave, it's probably not on his own free will. I slunk back into the cover of trees to work out a plan. Get the heck out of there was the first plan my mind came up with, followed closely by, get the heck out of here right now and don't look back. I wish that I would have listened to either of those plans. What I eventually settled on was, sneak around to the side of the entrance and try to see what's inside without being seen. That was the plan, however my mind was a little fuzzy in the details of how to accomplish that. I went back into the trees about 10 yards and then followed the tree line for 30 yards or so. After that, I carefully creeped out of the trees, making sure my or Luke's flashlight was off and snuck over to the mouth of the cave. The wind had died down and the sky was clear. There was enough of a moon reflecting off the snow to allow me to see where I was going without the flashlight. I crept up to the edge of the cave opening. My heart was beating out of my chest with every step that I took closer to the cave. I froze when I heard movement inside. I backed away as quickly and quietly as possible, and then tried to become part of the hillside. Mere moments later, something big and white lumbered out of the cave. My mind fought against the reality of what my eyes were seeing. It was big, bigger than a man and covered in long white fur. It walked upright, swinging its massive arms with claws at the end. I stood frozen in terror that the monster might spot me. I didn't breathe until it had disappeared into the trees. I crept into the cave, slowly peeking around the corner in case there was something else horrible in there. But what I found was amazing. There was a roaring fire going in the middle of the cave. I completely forgot where I was and stepped right up to it, holding out my frozen hands. The warmth felt so good that I took off my coat to bask in the heat. My feet screamed to be next. I sat beside the fire and took my boots off, holding my stocking feet up to the flames, nearly crying as they thawed. I closed my eyes and enjoyed being warm for the first time since we had started the search. When I opened my eyes, I looked around the cave and really wished that I hadn't. The resident of the cave had a certain, let's say, decorating style. The walls were splashed with red and in the corner were human heads, each one dangling from their own hair. There were wind chimes made of bones and in the corner was a large patch of pink hanging from a tree branch that had been stuck into the wall of the cave. As mortified as I was drawn to the pink thing hanging in the corner. I approached it slowly and put my hand out. The smell was horrific. It was like a backed-up sewage plant on a hot summer day. I gingerly touched the surface of it and recoiled immediately. It was human skin. I saw holes where arms and legs would go in. The monster was making its own human suit. After gawking at the macabre decorations, I remembered why I was here. My phone. I searched all over, eventually finding it in the pocket of a very recently dead body. Poor Luke, I thought, looking at the dismembered body. I wish I hadn't dragged him along in this stupid investigation. In fact, I wish I wouldn't have dragged me along in this stupid investigation. Should have left it to the police. I looked at my phone with a new revelation. I dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
A woman's voice answered. I'm in a cave in the forest and there are a lot of bodies here, I said. The monster who killed them could be back at any moment. I need police and emergency services. Sir, prank calls to emergency services are a chargeable offense. It's not a prank call. I need help out here as soon as possible. Even if I believed you, all my units are tied up right now with the weather emergency. In case you haven't noticed, we've had a significant snowfall in the last 24 hours. I know. My truck is stuck at mile marker 145, I said. I came out here to the woods to investigate somebody being dragged out of their car. The phone was ripped out of my hand and flung across the cave, where it landed and the screen went dark. I looked up and there stood the creature. Somehow it had snuck back into the cave while I was distracted with my ultimately futile phone call. I heard a low growl as it bared its fangs and flexed its claws. A yellow river ran down my leg as my mind went into pure panic mode. I knew that I was about to die horribly. I backed away slowly as it pursued me, matching me step for step. I backed myself into the corner where the heads hung in their grisly display. As I prepared to die, I had a moment of clarity. I reached up and pulled down one of the heads. The creature stopped and watched as I stared deeply into the eyes of this formerly living being. And then I reached back and threw it at the creature with every ounce of strength that I possessed. The head hit him square in the shoulder and he stumbled back in surprise. I didn't give him the luxury of recovering. I grabbed another head and threw it, and then another and another. Each one hit him in the torso and caused him to retreat another step. Finally, my aim was true and the thrown head connected with his. He seemed dazed for a moment, as I reached for another head and realized that I had run out of my ammunition. I reached down and pulled 2 femurs loose from my body and ran at the creature, swinging my clubs and connecting. At first, I hit a leg and then an arm and finally the head. Once I was close enough to hit his head, that's all that I aimed for. Hearing satisfying cracks of bone on bone drove me into a frenzy. I swung like a madman. The creature tried to swipe at me. It slashed my arm and my chest, but I didn't care. I was in a berserker rage, fighting for my life. I knew that if I stopped or even paused, it would all be over. Blow after blow landed, staggering him backward. I never thought of where we were going, just fought like a wild man. The creature stumbled on a rock and fell backwards into the fire. I watched as the scene seemed to unfold in slow motion. His arms pinwheeled as he lost his balance and his back landed on the burning wood. He laid there for a moment, looking like he was unable to move, and then he sucked in a massive gulp of air and unleashed the loudest scream that I had ever heard. Even if I hadn't been fighting for my life, the scream would have chilled me to the bone. He rolled off the fire and half ran, half limped out of the cave. I followed him out, watching as the trail of smoke disappeared into the distance. I went back inside and stared at the warm, inviting fire that had saved my life. I knew that it would be so easy to sit beside it and stay nice and toasty. I also knew that eventually the creature would return to his cave, and this time he wouldn't be caught off guard. I knew the only way to survive was to try to find my way back to my truck. I put my boots back on and immediately wished that I hadn't. They hadn't been close enough to the fire to really warm up. My feet were freezing from moment one. My jacket was like wearing a blanket of ice as well. I looked over at Luke's headless body, and I was filled with regret for getting him into this mess. I owed it to him to take him away from this place so that that thing wouldn't be able to defile his body anymore. I leaned down and hefted him onto my shoulder. I was glad that he was smaller than me, or I wouldn't have made it too far. I started toward the trees, hoping to pick up the path that we had used to get here. Partway through, I did find the path, but it seemed to lead to the left. The last thing that I wanted to do was get lost and give that monster a chance to ambush me. I had been carrying Luke for around a half hour. I was exhausted and the adrenaline crash from fighting off a monster had left me drained. I collapsed into the snow as Luke's body flopped off my shoulders. I didn't have the energy to get up. I was freezing to death. Luke's body was no help. It had already gone cold. So, this was where I sat. And if my story had ended there, it would have been bad. But thankfully it didn't. I resisted the urge to fall asleep. I sat and looked at the trees thinking maybe they would give or tell me what to do. But the trees didn't say anything. But as I sat there, I heard something. It was off in the distance, but it was loud. I stood, finding myself drawn to the sound. Knowing that I could barely stand, let alone carry Luke, I left his body there. I stumbled forward, guided by the sound. A few minutes later, I stood at the edge of the trees and looked as cars and trucks flew by on the interstate. I nearly cried. I walked to the berm of the road and looked right. There, maybe 50 feet away, sat my truck. Behind it was a state truck with its hazard lights on. I walked up and knocked on the door of the state truck. The driver looked out at me and nearly choked on the sandwich that he was eating. "What the heck happened to you?" he said, looking at my blood-soaked clothes. "It's a long story," I said. He called for police and an ambulance, and when they got there, I explained the situation repeatedly. When the cop looked like he wanted to arrest me, I explained about calling 911 from the cave. They kept me there in an ambulance, so at least I was warm while the cops searched for Luke's body in the cave. They found both by retracing my steps. Once the police were satisfied, the ambulance took me to the hospital. They checked my wounds and they patched me up, and then admitted me for observation. I used the hospital phone to call home to a panic-stricken Carolyn and a belligerent wife. I told them that I would be home in the morning. Carolyn was ecstatic. My wife was ambivalent. Next, I called the boss and told him where the truck had been towed to. I also told him where he could stick his job, and I hung up. I had just settled in to watch a show and fall asleep when my phone rang. "Hello?" "Well, aren't you just the hero?" the voice said. My spine turned to ice. "Luke?" "Good guess. But how?" "You haven't figured it out yet. Maybe I should wait and see if you can put the pieces together." "You were behind me and then you disappeared." "Good so far." "I thought maybe you would turn back until I saw your body in the cave." "Nope," he said. "Wrong guess." "But you were beheaded." "Wrong again. So that leaves only..." "You were the monster," I said softly. "Ding, ding, ding, we have a winner," he said. "Why?" "Why, you ask?" he said as he snorted. "Because people are the animals. Look at us. All we do is run around like rats in a maze trying to get ahead, while barely eking out enough of a living to feed our families. That's not living." "And what you do is," I said, grinding my teeth, "you slaughter people for fun." "I'm alive. When I become the creature, I'm free." "No, you're captive to your sick desires," I said. He chuckled. "Then so are you." "What do you mean?" "You saw how many heads were on the walls, over a dozen, and yet not one of them fought with the ferocity, the sheer rage that you did. Face it, you're like me." "I'm nothing like you," I said quietly. "Oh, I disagree. I think you're more like me than you would like to admit. I think it would only take a little nudge to push you out of the light and into the darkness." "I'll never be like you." "What if I told you someone you loved was going to die tonight?" The phone disconnected. "Luke!" I screamed into the phone but was only answered with a busy signal. I slammed the phone down and ripped the IV out of my arm. "What are you doing?" a nurse said as she walked into the room. "Leaving," I said, getting out of bed and dressing. "You're bleeding." "Well, then give me a Band-Aid," I said, putting on my shoes. "You can't leave," she said, holding my arms, trying to guide me back to bed. I glared death into her eyes. She backed away and left the room. I put on my shirt and jacket and then I walked out. I was met at the door by a security guard. "Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to go back to your room and get back into bed," he said. "Why, am I under arrest?" "Well, no, sir." "Then how can you detain me?" Uncertainty blossomed in his eyes. "I'm leaving," I said. "My family is in danger. If you want to call the cops, then send them to my home address, but get out of my way." He hesitated for a moment and then stepped aside. I stopped at a courtesy phone and made a quick call and then went outside. The snow from the previous day was piled up at the edges of the parking lot, making them look like miniature mountains. Out of one of the mountains stepped Luke. His face was bruised and he walked with a slight limp as he came towards me. I slipped my hand around to the back of my waistband and he paused. "Did you bring a little something for me?" he said. "You want to find out?" He chuckled. "Maybe later." So here we are again. What should we talk about this time? How about when you became insane? Toot toot. You shouldn't label people. "I'm not," I said. "You're not a person. I find the irony in the fact that you were building a human costume." He narrowed his eyes at me. "It's not a costume." "I just wonder," I said, ignoring him. "What happens when it's done? Will you then make another bigger monster costume to wear on top of it?" "I told you that it isn't a costume," he screamed, taking a step towards me. I readjusted my grip behind me, causing him to stop. "That's right, little caveman. I can end you at any time." He blinked and his eyes flicked from utter rage to nonchalance. "You know it's illegal to carry a handgun across state lines without a permit," he said. "It's only illegal if you get caught." Sirens pierced the night air as red and blue lights flashed. "Well, aren't you clever, keeping me busy while the police arrive?" he said, turning. "Don't," I said, holding my hand behind my back. He smiled. "I'll say hi to your family while you talk to the cops." And then he disappeared. I ran back inside the hospital and called home. "Hello?" Carolyn said. "Honey, you need to put Mommy on the phone." "Daddy, when are you coming home?" "Soon, Pumpkin, soon, but I need to talk to your mom." "Okay, here she is." "What?" she said groggily. "You need to take Carolyn and go to your mother's house," I said. There was a slight pause. "It's 2:30 in the morning," she growled. "It is? I don't even know." "You want me to go to my mother's house at 2:30 in the frickin' morning? Why? So she can tell me how worthless I am too. Oh, I'll get right on that." "No, listen, you're in danger." The phone disconnected. "No!" I screamed as I slammed the phone down and then picked it up again to call home. "Hello?" "Carolyn," I said. "Listen, there's something I need you to do for me." "Okay, Daddy." "There's a man coming to the house. He's a friend of mine and we're playing a little game." "Ooh, what kind of game?" "Hide and seek." "Is he looking for you?" "No, actually, he's looking for you and Mommy." "Why?" "That's just the way that we play this game." "Okay." "I need you to go find the best hiding place that you have. The one where nobody will ever find you and you don't come out until I get there." "How will I know it's you?" "I'll whistle your favorite song." "Okay." "Now, it might be a while until I get there, but I want you to go hide now." "What about Mommy?" "I tried to tell Mommy, but she doesn't want to play." "Well, maybe I should ask her." "No, Pumpkin, you just hide. I'll take care of Mommy." "Okay, Daddy." "You should go to the bathroom and get yourself some water and snacks because you might be hiding for a while." "Okay, Daddy." "That's my awesome girl. I love you very much." "I love you too, Daddy." "Don't forget, Mommy isn't playing. So if she calls for you or comes looking for you, don't come out until you hear me whistling your favorite song." "That'll be easy. Mommy never comes looking for me." I sighed and stifled a tear. "Okay, Pumpkin, I better get going so we can play the game." "What happens if he finds me before you do?" My breath caught in my throat. "Then we lose," I said quietly. "We want to win, don't we?" We most definitely want to win. Okay, I'll see you later. The phone disconnected. I hope so, I thought. 3 squad cars pulled up to the front of the hospital, sirens blaring, lights flashing. They ran inside the hospital and locked eyes on me. Freeze, the first cop said, pointing his gun at me. I put my hands up. I'm the one who called you, I said as the cop searched me and found no weapon. What are you talking about? He said, more than a little annoyed. You heard about them finding all the bones and body parts in the cave out by the interstate. The cop narrowed his eyes. That hasn't been released to the public yet, he said quietly, looking around for anybody who might be within earshot. Well, I was there. I was in the cave, I said. So why aren't you upstairs in bed? He said. I had heard that you had been injured. Because the murderer called me and said that he was going after my family, thinking that I was laying helpless in a hospital bed. My God. Yeah, that's why I called you, I said. I need to get home before he gets there. Let's go then, he said, starting toward the door. Where's your house? Well, in Pennsylvania. He stopped and turned on me. You realize this is Maryland, right? I know, I was driving a delivery truck when I got stuck in the snowstorm. I can't do anything in another state, he said. Can you at least drive me there? He hesitated. I don't know. My wife and 8-year-old daughter's lives are at stake. He stepped over to the other cops and spoke quietly to them. After a moment they left and he stepped over to me. I can take you, but I won't be able to intervene in any way, he said. That's fine as long as I get there. Let's go, he said, heading for the door. He turned his lights on and drove like a madman for 58 miles. When we were almost there, he slowed down and turned off the lights. We pulled up to the house and I looked at the unusual lights that were on. How's it look? He said. I scanned the house slowly and found nothing amiss. It looks like it should, I said, getting out and starting toward the driveway. Do you want me to call local law enforcement? I paused and considered it. I'll wait until I check out the house, I said. Thanks for everything. That's it, he said. This man is dangerous and I don't want you to get hurt too. I appreciate everything you've done, which is why I'm telling you to leave. He sighed and stretched out his hand. Good luck, he said, as I shook it and stepped toward the house. I walked slowly up to the front door, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Finding nothing, I tried the door. It was unlocked. That made the hairs stand on the back of my neck. I knew that he was there. I tried to look as nonchalant as possible. I sighed and went upstairs to the bedroom, trying to look like I was just tired. I expected an attack with each step that I took. Every step that I wasn't attacked made me that much more paranoid. Until I made it to the bedroom, I was a basket case. My mind was running 1,000,000 miles an hour. On the outside, I was doing my best to look like it was a normal day coming home from work. As soon as I made it to the bedroom, I went for the gun in my wife's bedstand drawer, the one that she thought I didn't know about. When I opened the drawer, it was gone. I double-checked the false bottom, but there was no gun. I went to my hidden lockbox and got my gun, loaded it, and felt a little better after checking the rest of the house. I stalked slowly from room to room, watching every corner that I turned, leading with my gun, waiting for the inevitable. I opened every closet, checked every window, and then went downstairs and did the same thing. Once the top 2 floors were cleared, I went to the basement. I opened the door and turned on the light. The stairs were uninviting and every creak of every step that I descended made me flinch. I made it to the bottom without incident except for a near mental breakdown. The unfinished basement had a musty smell that reminded me of death and decay. I searched the main room and then went to the furnace room. There was only a single light hanging from a wire in each of the rooms. When I got to the furnace room, it was small due to the furnace and tanks that inhabited it, but it also casted a myriad of shadows. There were plenty of hiding places in here. Beads of sweat formed on my forehead, and knowing that this was the last place in the house to be searched, I knew that he had to be in here waiting for me. My grip on the pistol was so tight that my knuckles had turned white and the sweat made it slippery. I was half afraid that it would slip out of my hand if I fired. I slowly checked each shadow and hiding place, each one making me more anxious for the next. It came down to the last spot. Beside the furnace was a shadowy area. I gripped the gun even more tightly and jumped toward the dark spot, aiming my gun in the middle of the shadow. Nothing happened. No one attacked me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw that the space was empty. I faced a harsh reality. He's not here, I said to myself, but neither are Cheryl or Carolyn. I turned and started back towards the stairs when the phone rang. I rushed up the stairs, nearly tripping and falling into the hard wooden boards. I made it to the kitchen, breathing hard, and I answered the phone. Hello? The dreadful chuckle told me all I needed to know.
Was I there?
Luke said. You son of a...
Temper. Calm down or you won't get to talk to that certain special someone.
Where are they?
They? I only have one. Did I miss someone?
I mentally cursed myself for being so sloppy, but I tried to recover quickly. I forgot. Carolyn is staying over at a friend's house.
Oh, really?
He said, as I hoped he believed it.
Well, I suppose I can go find her later.
You leave her alone, I screamed.
Oh my, that is a sore spot. I'll definitely have to find her. In the meantime, perhaps you would like to talk to your darling wife.
There was a rustling sound and then Cheryl's voice came on.
What's happening? Who is this person and why did he take me?
Calm down, everything's gonna be okay.
Are you nuts?
She squealed.
I'm being held hostage by some sicko. You don't even know where we are and you're saying it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm supposed to say to keep you from freaking out and making everything worse.
A near miss on that one,
she said. How about try and stay calm and don't give him any reason to hurt you?
That sounds a little closer to believable.
The phone rustled and Luke came back on the line.
This is the conversation you have with the person that you may never see alive again. I could probably look up a good marriage counselor for you too.
Or you could tell me what you want and quit jerking around.
Well, what fun would that be?
So I'm just supposed to sit here and wait for you to come get me?
I'm sure there would be several officers waiting for me if I returned to your house.
Quit stalling, I said. What do you want?
I want you to retrieve your daughter from her friend's house. If that's where she is, and bring her to me. I think we should all sit down to dinner together.
Never happen.
Well, then I'll kill your wife now in the most painful and interesting way possible, and then continue to hunt you and your daughter.
I gritted my teeth so hard that I was sure he could hear it. Looks like I have no choice.
Excellent. Then I will call back in 1 hour with a location and you will bring yourself and your daughter.
The line disconnected before I could say something that I might have regretted. I slammed the phone down and rushed around the house whistling the theme to The Little Mermaid. As I went from floor to floor, my whistling became louder and more frantic. She has to be here, I thought. If he had her, he would have gloated about it. My desperation grew by the moment and I heard a rustling in the attic. I grabbed the rope in the upstairs hallway and pulled down the attic stairs. Slowly I went up and looked around. In the back corner I saw a large chest that was bouncing around on its own. I rushed over and ripped the lid open to find Carolyn. Did we win, Daddy? She said with a smile. Yes, sweetie, we won, I said, squeezing her in a big hug. But now he wants a rematch. What does that mean? It means he didn't like losing and he wants to play again. Oh good, I've thought of a better place to hide. She scampered toward the steps and was halfway down them when I called out to her. Carolyn, don't hide just yet. I caught up with her and we descended to the upstairs hallway. He wants us to play in his turf this time, I said. What's turf? It means we have to play somewhere that he wants. Well, okay, where? I ruffled her dark hair and smiled. Wherever it is, I'm sure you'll do great. We went downstairs and headed for the door. You should probably use the bathroom before we go. It might be a long trip. Okay, she said and she skipped away. I watched her go, wishing that I had nearly as much enthusiasm for what was to come. 10 minutes later, we were in the car and I wasn't obeying any speed limit signs. Why are you driving so fast? We need to get there quickly. Is Mommy playing this time? I hesitated. Yeah, she is. Oh good, she can have fun with us too, she said, smiling. I think Mommy might already be having fun, I said with a stone face. That's not fair, she said, pouting. Why couldn't she wait for us? I chuckled in spite of myself. Just then, the phone rang. Hello, I said.
Let me talk to the little girl,
Luke said. Why?
to make sure that you have her and aren't pulling some trick.
No. He paused. Cheryl screamed.
Would you like to try again?
I put the phone on speaker. There, she can hear you now.
Hello, Carolyn,
he said. Hello, she said cheerfully.
Are you coming to visit your mommy and me?
Yeah, we're on our way now, she said as I tried to wave her off. I grabbed the phone. We're losing you, I said. You're cutting. I hung up the phone. Pumpkin, I said, barely containing my emotions. You can't tell him things like that. Why not? I thought for a long moment. Because it's against the rules. If he knows where we are, it gives him an unfair advantage. What does that mean? It's like he's cheating because we're helping him. Just then the phone rang. Hello? I said.
We both know your phone didn't lose reception. Put the little girl back on.
No, he sighed. And then after a long moment, Cheryl screamed again.
How long do I have to keep this up?
He said. If you want to talk to her, you'll have to wait. Now tell me where to go.
All right,
he said.
I can wait a little longer.
He rattled off an address and I hung up the phone. What happened? Carolyn said. Oh, nothing, Pumpkin. He just told me where we're going to play. Oh, good, she said, bouncing in her seat. I can't wait. I focused on the road and kept the tears from escaping my eyes as they welled up. 15 minutes later, we stopped in front of a familiar house. I don't understand. Why are we here? Come with me, I said, getting out of the car and walking up to the front porch. The door opened before we arrived and out stepped a middle-aged woman. Grandma, Carolyn said, hugging her. Are you playing too? Playing what, dear? She said, looking from Carolyn to me. Listen, Pumpkin, I said, holding her hand. That man that I was talking about, he's a bad man. If he would have found you, he would have hurt you. But you said he has Mommy. Is he hurting her? I paused for a long moment as Cheryl's mother shot me a look of concern. I hope not, sweetie. Let me go with you. Let me help you, Carolyn said. You can't, baby, I said, gently holding her hands. The best thing you can do is stay here with Grandma and be safe. But what about you? She said. How will I know that you're safe? My words were choked out when Carolyn wrapped her arms around my neck in a massive hug and squeezed so tight that I saw stars. You can't go, not without me. Honey, I said, peeling her arms gently off my neck. I have to. What about the police? If I call the police, he'll hurt Mommy. What if you go and he hurts you both? I had no answer. I knew that was a very strong possibility. Take care of her, please, I said to Cheryl's mom as I rose and kissed Carolyn on the top of her head. She nodded and pulled Carolyn toward her. No, she said, grabbing me around the waist and squeezing. You can't go. I have to, baby, I said, pulling her arms from around me. No, Daddy. I turned and walked toward the car. Please. Carolyn screamed as her grandmother held onto her to keep her from running after me. I got in the car and started down the road as Carolyn got loose from her grandma and ran after me. Daddy. It took every ounce of fortitude that I had to keep going. It was hard to see with the tears streaming down my face. It took me 17 minutes to arrive at the address that Luke had provided. The sky had gone from black to steel gray. The sun would be rising soon, but it held no fascination for me. All I cared about was getting Luke to stop. Did this mean that I had what it took to kill him if necessary? I had already attacked him, but that was in self-defense. Could I really point my gun at him and pull the trigger? That I didn't know yet. My dad always used to say that you think you would react a certain way in a certain situation, but you never knew for sure until you were there. As far as I was concerned, I was here. This was the time to find out what I would do. I pulled up to the address as the sky turned blood red. I didn't take that as a good omen. I looked out at the old, dilapidated warehouse that loomed in front of me. It was surrounded by trees, making it look like the forest was reclaiming what had been taken when the building was built. I sat there having a mental tug-of-war. Did I take the gun with me or leave it in the car? Conventional wisdom would say, of course, take the gun with me, but I knew that he would play any card he could against me. He would use my wife as leverage to disarm me, so instead of giving him my trump card, leave it here and hope that I survive long enough to come back and get it. I knew that he would be suspicious if I didn't have some weapon with me, so I grabbed the tire iron out of the trunk and headed toward the building. I arrived at the rusty door and felt like I needed a tetanus shot from just looking at it, but I sighed and opened it, holding my weapon in a defensive position. I stepped through and tried to close it as quietly as possible, but that wasn't happening. The hinges made a screeching noise that nearly scared me out of my skin. It sounded like an animal screaming in pain. I expected my host to accost me, knowing that I was here, but I was only met with silence and the fading echo of the screeching door hinges. The warehouse seemed like an empty shell. There was detritus all over, but a surprising lack of machinery, or the usual things you would expect in a warehouse. I started toward the far wall, watching for any movement. Soon my nose caught a whiff of smoke. I searched the air and found a small wisp rising in the general direction that I was heading. My mind fought against me going straight toward it, screaming, "It's a trap!" But I knew that this was his turf and he would have every path covered. There was no use to sneak around to try to gain the upper hand that was clearly his. I walked straight toward the smoke and eventually found a fire in the middle of the dirt floor. There was a stack of wooden pallets off to the side and a few laying in pieces near the fire. I stepped up and warmed myself with the orange flames as they licked the air hungrily. "Well now, this seems familiar," I heard a voice say off to the side. "No decoration this time," I said without looking up. "I just moved in," Luke said, stepping into the light. "You gotta give me some time to go shopping." "Where's Cheryl?" I said. "Oh, you know, she's around." The fact that she's not making a racket doesn't bode well for her physical well-being. "She's in working order." "What's that supposed to mean?" "She may have received a slap or three to stop her hysterical screaming." I shrugged. "Understandable." "Where's Carolyn?" "Oh, she's waiting in the car." "Toot toot," he hissed. "That wasn't a part of the game." I looked at him across the fire. The flames lit his eyes with a deadly and mischievous flicker. "My daughter is not a chess piece," I said. "I told her to call the police if I'm not back out in 30 minutes with Cheryl." "Well, now, we can't have the cops ruining the fun," he said unfazed. "I guess we'll play another day," he said, turning to leave. "Wait a minute," I said. "That's it? I came all the way out here for nothing." "You didn't play by the rules." "What didn't I do? You told me to bring Carolyn and I brought her." "But you didn't bring her to me," he said. "This has the feel of a trap, and a predator can smell a trap." "You still think you're some kind of animal. Where's your little monster costume? Do you get the burn marks off yet?" He stopped, turned and stalked toward me with rage flashing in his eyes like flame. "I told you before, it's not a..." I swung the tire iron and connected with his temple. He went down hard. As before, I didn't hesitate. I slammed the metal into his skull as many times as I could before he rolled away. I chased after him, wanting with every fiber of my being to pound him until he was nothing but goo. The gunshot echoed through the empty warehouse like a thunderclap. I looked down his blood poured from my shoulder. The pain that followed drove me to my knees. I looked at him and he was holding my wife's handgun. I wonder where that went, I said, pulling my coat off to get a better look at the hole in my shoulder. The side of his face was red, and his right eye had swollen shut. He shakily aimed the gun at me and pulled the trigger. Again, the echo reverberated through the empty building, but this time, there was no pain with the sound. He had missed. I dove to the other side of the fire and laid flat on the ground, trying to make the smallest target possible. The downside was I couldn't see him. I shuffled around the fire a little bit at a time, trying to sneak a peek at where he was. Every inch of crawling I paid for with pain. A bullet ricocheted next to my foot and I scrambled the other way. What's wrong? Are you allergic to lead? If it's moving fast enough. I don't understand why you're so resistant to the obvious. And what's that? That you're just like me. I'll never be like you. Luke chuckled, but it came out harsh and raspy, and he choked in the middle of it. Denial only makes it that much better. I can't do the things you do and I don't want to. Tell that to my face. That's survival. No, I can spot a fellow apex predator. All you need to do is let go of that sliver of morality. I crawled painfully to the other side of the fire, trying to get a glimpse of him. I saw his foot moving behind the fire. He was circling the same way that I was. We were crawling on the ground, following each other in a slow and painful circle. Remind me, don't apex predators usually not get along? I said, trying to distract him. That is true. Look at us trying to kill each other. All I want is to go home and be left alone, I said, wincing in pain. You're the one who wanted this to happen. Needed it to happen. But why? Because it's too easy now, Luke said. You showed me that I need to challenge myself. I don't care about a challenge. You win, no challenge. Just leave me alone. You can't win if the enemy won't fight. Am I the enemy now? He paused. You always were, he said, breathing harshly. From the time you fought back, you became the enemy. From the time you showed me my weakness, you became the enemy. From the time you became me, you became my enemy. He rose from behind the fire and aimed at me, his grotesque face covered in red, his right eye ruined. He held the gun in his trembling hand. When you became me, he said, I knew that I had to kill you. And not just kill you, but destroy your world. He looked toward the door and his twisted face contorted into a smile. It was the most disturbing thing that I had ever seen. Even with his face half destroyed, he was still thinking of ways to hurt me. I knew right then and there that there was only one way he would ever stop. I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. I rose and ran over to him. He turned toward me, bringing the gun to bear on me. That split second was the most important of my life. He fired as I swung my tire iron. The gun went off. I felt pain on the side of my head, but I ignored it. My rage had complete control over me. I hit him in the face, and before he could react, I hit him again and again. He fell to his knees, and I hit him in the back of the head. He went to the ground, and I hit him over and over. I hit his back repeatedly until I heard a satisfying crack. The feel of the heavy metal rod in my hand, smashing his bones, made me smile. The pain was long forgotten as the sheer adrenaline and rage swept me away. I pictured every one of his victims and the horrible things that he had done to them. I screamed as each strike became a new level of revenge. I kept at it for what felt like forever. Finally, I ran out of energy. I collapsed to my knees over the pile that had once been a person pretending to be an animal. I dropped the tire iron and stared at my hands, watching in macabre fascination as the red dripped from my fingers. I reached over and pulled the gun from Luke's fingers. I looked around for wherever he had Cheryl. I hadn't heard so much as a whimper from her since I had stepped inside of the warehouse. Knowing that she wasn't one to keep her mouth shut, I knew that she wasn't in good shape if she was even alive. I searched the far section of the warehouse that Luke had come from. In the far corner were some small offices. I searched them one by one, finally, and in the last one I found her. She was strapped in a chair and her head was slumped forward. She wasn't moving. I sighed and put my hand on her head. She flung her head backward. "I'll kill you," she screamed. "Cheryl, it's me," I said, trying to calm her down. "Oh, I know it's you. You're the one who brought him into our lives. You're the one to blame for whatever happens." I stepped back. "How can you think that?" "Because it's true. You met this psychopath and now he's after us. You've endangered us." "No, I came to save." "Look at me. I'm tied to a chair. He was going to kill me and do who knows what else before I died, all because of you." "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to have to be out on the road all the time for us to even survive?" "I don't know. You're not around long enough to ask. So I work like crazy to provide for my family and it's not enough for you. Well, if you would get a better job, you could provide more. That's all you want is more. It's not your fault that you refuse to get a job. It's all on me. Get me out of this chair." I hung my head. "I'm sorry that I brought this on us. I'm sorry that I'm not a better provider. I'm sorry you look at me as a failure." "Where's Carolyn?" I laughed. "This is the first time in years that you've shown any concern for our daughter." "My daughter," she said. "You lost your parental rights when you brought that psychopath into our lives. You drink like a fish, neglect our daughter, and essentially make her an orphan while you're hungover, and you want to take her away. She's my daughter, and I'll take her just to hurt you." "You can't mean that," I said slowly. "Oh, but I do. I want to hurt you the way that he hurt me. I want you to face the uncertainty and fear the way that I did. Oh, it's all about you, isn't it? And you're so blind to your own shortcomings that you would use our daughter as a weapon against me. Look at you. Your hands are covered in red. You're a psycho just like him." "I'm nothing like him." "Oh, tell it to the judge. I'll make sure you never get to see our daughter again." I pulled out the gun, touched it to her forehead, and pulled the trigger. She rocked violently back in the chair and then was still. A wisp of smoke rose from the hole in her head. As I stared at what was left of her laying on the floor, the thought struck me. This is the first argument that I've ever won with her. The enormity of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I'm a bad man, I thought. I fell to the floor as tears rolled down my blood-stained cheeks. For a long time, I lay there thinking about the last 2 days of my life and the turn that they had taken. After a while, I rose and left the room. I glanced back at my wife that I had once loved long ago before. I went back out into the main warehouse and walked toward the fire. My mind had me half convinced that Luke's body would be gone, but it wasn't. It laid in the same place, with the pool surrounding it. I reached down and shoved the pistol into his hand. I stood and looked at him, wondering what had made him snap and turn into this animal that he had become. The pain in my shoulder and the side of my head brought me back to reality. I reached up and found a graze on the side of my head. It wasn't deep, but it still hurt. I turned and left the warehouse, wanting nothing more than a shower and my bed. As I stepped outside, I saw a police car sitting beside my car. I walked up and found out it was the cop who had driven me from Maryland. How did you, I said, know where you were? I followed you. It seemed like the right thing to do. Yeah, seemed like, I repeated. And judging by your appearance and the fact that you're still standing, I would say that you got him. I nodded. Do I want to know the details? I shook my head. Looks like you need to get cleaned up. Yeah, I said. You gonna take me to jail and get me a shower? Why would I do that? He said. I looked at him with utter surprise. I told you that I couldn't intervene. I am way out of my jurisdiction. And besides, if you ask me, he got what he deserved. Off the record. Off the record, I said. He looked at his watch. Hey, look at that, my shift just ended. Guess I should be heading back. You gonna be okay? My shoulder twinged. Yeah, I think I'll go to the hospital. Yeah, it sounds like a smart move. You have a nice day, sir. Thanks, I said, offering my hand. For everything. He looked at the blood and then at me. I think you'll understand if I don't shake your hand. Yeah, I said, dropping my hand. You drive safe. He nodded and drove away. I stumbled over to my car, feeling weak from blood loss and adrenaline crash, and I drove to the hospital and was treated for 2 gunshot wounds. As standard practice with AGSW, the nurse called the police, and I was soon answering a lot of questions. After they investigated the scene, they had many more questions. They expressed their condolences for the loss of my wife and for my injuries. They were also impressed that I was able to fight off the gunman. Once the whole story had been told, there was no question about the condition of Luke's body. The interviewing officer even told me off the record that he would have done the same thing if some psycho had just shot his wife. I nodded in understanding and didn't correct him. The following day, I was surprised when I received a couple of visitors. "Daddy," Carolyn said, running up and giving me a big hug. I winced in pain as she squeezed my shoulder but smiled at her as she released me. "Did you win the game?" "I did." "What about Mom?" Cheryl's mom looked at me apologetically. "We haven't had a discussion yet. I thought maybe that was something you would like to handle." I sighed. There was nothing in this world that I wanted to do more at this moment than avoid this conversation. "Mommy lost Pumpkin," I said. Her face fell. "So Mommy won't be coming home," I said. "But you said you were going to get her." "I know, sweetie, but the bad man got her first." Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her grandma. "You promised," she said, looking at me as though she could see the blood that covered me yesterday. "I know, sweetie, but I did all I could," I said. "Maybe it would help to remember all the fun times you and your mom had together," Grandma said. Carolyn thought for a long time. "Like when Mom and Dad and me went to the amusement park last summer." "That's a good one," Grandma said. "Or when Mommy, Daddy, and I went to the ocean." "Yeah, that was a lot of fun." "What about when Mommy and I?" She paused. "Does it have to be with only Mommy and me?" "It can be whatever you want, Pumpkin," I said. "Okay, because I can't think of once with just Mommy and me." I stifled a tear again. "You just think of any ones that you want to," I said. We spent the next hour reliving memories of the fun times the family had had together. Carolyn couldn't think of a single one with just her and her mother. The following few months were tough. Carolyn would often wake up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, and I would have to lay with her until she went back to sleep. Cheryl's mom had been great. She watched Carolyn when she wasn't at school, and I would have a late run. I also went back to driving the truck. I often passed the spot where the cave is. I know it's off in the distance through the trees, but in my mind's eye, I can see it. I would like to say that it doesn't affect me. I would like to say that I'm not tempted to drag some of these idiot drivers that I deal with off to the cave and make my own decorations. I would like to say that, but sometimes, I'm not a bad man. Trucking across America takes me to some of the absolute weirdest stops. Podunk stations and rest areas are easily the strangest. Give me the security of a metro area any day of the week. Bare minimum, the pay's good. I can't vouch for others in the business, but sometimes it just so happens that I'll blink tired and miss a sign on the freeway and drive ahead in the dark night, trying to figure out exactly what my GPS is trying to tell me. Rubbing my eyes, maybe I'll see a place just up ahead that is a space to park for a few hours. Maybe a bed in the rear of my cab is a godsend. No roach-infested rooms for me. I rolled out of South Dakota on the I-90 and passed Beaver Creek into Minnesota. Beyond that, I couldn't tell where I was when my eyes got all fuzzy. The GPS froze up trying to recalculate. Road people talk about the black dog. That little shadow thing that jumps in front of the engine when you get dog tired. Is that where it comes from? But that night at least, he was nowhere to be seen. I glanced over to the pile of empty plastic one-shot energy bottles resting haphazardly on the passenger seat. They were supposed to keep me awake, but they had long lost their potency on me. Squinting ahead, watching the headlights cut the path, I rolled my window down to let the cool air in. Maybe that would help. Wind burst through the cabin and I rubbed my face. That's when I caught sight of a truck stop advertisement. It seemed like my best bet to catch a couple winks before I got back on the road. Maybe I could even get something to eat. I pulled up the ramp and took the bridge hanging over the freeway towards that dull-lit sign that called like heaven. I kicked out of the cab, stretching while tugging my waistband out from the places that it dug. It felt good. Standing in the big lot, I read the establishment sign. End of the road. It felt cold looking up at that sign leveled on two poles. I shivered and withdrew my jacket from the cab before slamming the door shut. The lot was nearly empty. The only vehicles besides mine was a pair of old cars parked around back that I assumed belonged to the employees working the owl shift. As I crossed the asphalt, I caught a glimpse of a woman standing in the wide center window of the dining area. And then the blinds came down to hide her. A chill crawled down the back of my neck, so I threw up the collar of my jacket, blaming it on the night air. This is the part where I should have taken my dear old dead dad's wisdom. He would say, "Bert, if it feels like a setup, it's a setup." Of course, he died in jail though. Pushing through the glass door, I was immediately met by the warmth and the smell of waffle batter cooking as the noise of a jukebox in the far corner played, cover of a Rolling Stone. Lining the kitchen's wall was a counter with red-high stools. I took the one nearest to the exit, peering in through the order window to see if I could see the cook. A waitress, a young woman with blue eyes, black curls, and a khaki-brown uniform, greeted me with a quick smile as she handed me one of these single-paged laminated menus. Her name tag said, Betty. "What can I get ya?" I put the menu under my elbows. "Bacon and eggs and some decaf." "Can do." She moved to the coffee pot behind the counter and poured me a cup before moving to the kitchen. Holding the ceramic cup in my hands, I tapped my foot along to the old song coming from the jukebox. "The place is pretty empty," I called through the open hole beyond the counter. She poked her head in through the rectangle opening, shooting me another smile before scanning the main room. "Is it?" she said. I glanced over my shoulder. All the booths were empty and all the tables too. What could she have possibly meant? Not knowing how to respond, I took a sip. She giggled and ducked out of view. Examining the memorabilia hanging on the walls, I was immediately struck by how out of place things felt. On the wall by the jukebox was a poster promoting Reagan's 1980 campaign, still as pristine as ever. Then there was, right by the door that I had entered, a blocky cigarette vending machine. I blinked. The kitchen door swung open, forcing a jump out of me, and Betty delicately placed the white plate on the counter while I wasn't looking. I pointed to the cigarette machine. "Those things are illegal, aren't they?" My eyes stayed glued to the object. She shot me a funny look. I swallowed hard and shifted around so as to not look at the vending machine. And then a sick fist twisted my entrails around and my fingers gripped the counter. I wanted to scream, but it wouldn't come out. I stared down at the plate, catching the 4 bacon slices in a floaty, oozy orange pool, a pile of veiny chicken embryos. Betty rounded the corner. "Are you all right?" I pushed the plate away. "There's something wrong with these eggs." She examined the plate. What's the matter with them?" Was she messing with me? "Those are fertilized." She lifted my fork, prodding one of the embryos with a corner prong. Blood sprang and collected in the edges of the plate. "God, no, don't do that." I swatted her hand away as the fork fell onto the floor with a sharp metallic clatter. She squinted and then pursed her lips. "Sir, don't touch me like that." Sorry." I glanced to the mess on the plate and tore a napkin from a nearby dispenser to cover it. What's wrong with those eggs? She took a step away from me. There's nothing wrong with them, sir. What do you mean, did you not see that blood? Her eyes darted around the diner, flustered, cheeks red. You're starting to make the other customers uncomfortable. Please. A chill swept clear through my jacket till I couldn't feel my fingers or toes. Then heat washed down my body. I spun on the stool, looking around in all directions. What are you talking about? There's nobody else here. She leaned in very close, too close, and whispered, Is there someone that I need to call for you? Are you, she tapped the side of her temple with an index finger, all there? This enraged me, but still there was that lingering feeling that I wasn't seeing all to be seen. I shouted, I'm not crazy, lady. A thud came from the kitchen, followed by rattling chains. I gripped the countertop again and white-knuckled. Betty shook her head, throwing up her hands. Oh, now you've done it. You've woken him up. What? You heard me. As she moved to the kitchen to push the door in, she stopped midway through the threshold. I could hear the rattling of the chains clearer, thumping and breathing and scraping nails. I'll have your bill just as soon as I put him back to sleep. Removing my hands from the counter, I saw that I had left behind nail marks. My hand shook as I withdrew my wallet. Fumbling with my debit card, I waited and listened. Suddenly, I was struck with the idea that I might die there if I weren't to leave immediately. Betty from somewhere in the rear of the kitchen spoke. No, you can't see the gas. Shh. If you don't go back to sleep, I'll cut you. I pulled my jacket tighter around as she returned. Not a noise came from the kitchen. The dizzying effects of surrealism were in full force. Whoa there, fancy pants. She held up my debit card. We don't accept these. I threw a 20 on the counter and snapped the card from her hand. All right, I'll be going then. What about your change? She popped the bill straight while holding it up to the overhead light. Hold on. Heart pounding onto my chest, I spun around with my arm still holding the glass door open. Yes? What is this, some joke money? What do you mean? It's fake. Says that it was printed in 2013. I shrugged. More than anything, I just wanted to get out of that place. I was certain that I would die. It's all I got. She rolled her eyes. Fine, just go then and don't come back. I don't intend to. I ran as fast as I could to my rig, swung out the door, and I dove in, scrambling to slam it shut again. Sitting in the driver's seat, I chewed my tongue. That was not normal. Something told me that if I spent a moment longer in that place, something terrible was going to happen to me. Intuition, or my dad's words maybe. If it feels like a setup, it's a setup. I double and triple checked to make sure the doors of the cab were locked, and I tried bedding down and back. But try as I might, I could not shake the feeling that I heard the distinct tapping of footsteps outside. And then, of course, I would peer out the windows, but all that was there to greet me was long, still shadows. There, across the lot, sat the diner with its warm yellow glow, seeping out through blinds onto the asphalt. My mind raced all night as I tried closing my eyes in bed. As tired as I had been coming to the place, my adrenaline wouldn't afford rest. The cabin felt muggy, wrong. I waited and waited and waited until a gentle sunlight spilled in and I gave up on sleep. Moving to the driver's seat, I cranked the engine alive, and that's when I noticed it. The truck stop sign was no longer lit up. In fact, there was no sign whatsoever, and the windows of the old place were covered in plywood board, and tiles dangled like tongues from its ancient roof on loose nails. I pulled out fast and hit the freeway, knowing only that I needed to go east and away from there. It comes as no surprise to me that the open road has tricks aplenty harbored around every dark corner of America. Many of the guys that have been trekking far longer than me tell some of the wildest stories. Tales of the black dog come to life, or even psychos trying to run drivers off the road in desolate, otherwise quiet stretches. Then there's one of the things that truckers are known for even if we don't like it. Well, that would be lot lizards. Women and men of the night that hang around truck stops, hoping to shack up with the driver. Although their reputation is skewed toward unscrupulous, due to some of them being addicts, the majority of the ones that I've met have been relatively nice. People just trying to make their way in this crazy world. For every outrageous story you hear about a toothless granny busting somebody's windows with a tire iron, there are at least 24 or more of them who are scared and penniless and far from home. I ran into an outlier among them. On my way down I-25 southbound through Colorado, I saw the sign for a Love's gas station near Berthoud and decided it would be good to stretch my legs one last time before the home stretch to Santa Fe. With still a few hours of sunlight left, I could refuel, catch an early dinner and maybe a shower before I kept on keeping on. The parking lot was slam-packed with cars and trucks alike. I couldn't wait to fill my growling stomach, even if it was with some BS like hamburger steak. I moseyed up to the door after topping the tank with my cart at the pump. With my spare clothes slung over a shoulder, I pushed in through the door and was greeted by stock rock music coming from the overhead speakers as the man behind the counter nodded to me. After showering, I returned to the general store area and could see through the glass divider that their restaurant was full. I opted to buy a handful of jerky and chips and energy drinks instead. Once I had brought my items to the counter, the clerk rang it up, beeping each one slowly, robotically. Reaching for my wallet, I asked, "What's the damage?" Dead-eyed, he shifted his gaze from the register to me, then pushed his Broncos cap back to expose his furrowed brow. "Why are you always on the road?" "Huh? Why are you always on the road? We hate it when you're gone. We hate it and we miss you." Goosebumps sprang across my arms and my stomach fell into my feet. "I'm sorry, Chief. Have we met?" The clerk blinked a few times, shaking his head. His eyes returned to the register. That'll be $25.68. "What did you say?" I could feel my knees going weak as I stood there at the counter. I glanced over my shoulder to make sure that no one else was standing behind me and then looked back to the clerk. "What did you say?" He gave me a meager, confused smile. "That'll be $25.68. No, what did you say to me before?" "I'm sorry, I'm confused." Maybe I was tired. Yeah, that must have been the culprit. I was starting to hear things that weren't there. The thought of taking a vacation came to mind. Lord knows it had been too long since I had had a nice long vacation. Perhaps I could take a cruise south of the border, ease my mind, drink tequila, and forget. I paid him and I left. As I walked across the parking lot towards my rig, I had already torn into one of the bags of salt and vinegar chips, shoveling a fist of them into my mouth. Probably more than anything else, my sedentary lifestyle combined with the fact that I ate garbage was beginning to fatigue me. And that's when I saw her. Blonde hair, black cowboy hat, blue jean bell-bottoms. I stopped mid-step, potato chips crumbling out of my frozen hand. The audacity of this woman struck me first. There she was, leaning against the right headlight of my rig. Her eyes cut through me. How was it that she looked exactly like somebody I already knew? She might as well have been a doppelganger. But upon examining her face, I noticed that she had a disgusting brown birthmark the size of a nickel on her otherwise milk-white chin. Stunning. "Hey there," she said. Her lips shot me a kiss. The plastic bag full of snacks and drinks that I was carrying had torn straight through, and I watched as a Red Bull bounced under the front tire of the rig. She laughed at me as I went chasing after them. "You've got a bed in this thing, don't you?" Scooping as many of the things that had fallen as I could against my chest, I tried ignoring her. "Oh, what's the matter, cowboy?" she asked. "Not interested," I said. "Interested in what exactly?" "I don't like paying for it. I know what you're here for and I don't have an issue with your line of work, but I personally don't involve myself with it." She laughed. "Oh, what's that supposed to mean? What exactly do you think my line of work is?" "You're pay to win." She pulled her expression into one of mock offense. "Oh, don't be that way." And then her hands came up in flat palms and one of her pointed boots kicked off the front of my rig, leaving behind a dark streak. "All right, you caught me." She rubbed her arms. "It sure is cold out here, though. Do you think that I could warm up in your truck for a few minutes at least?" I frowned. "Why don't you just go up to the store?" "They don't like me in there." Sighing, I pointed a finger at her. "All right, but only for a couple of minutes. I need to go on soon." Maybe it was because she was pretty. Maybe it was because her face was so familiar. I'm uncertain why I cracked open the door and let her crawl inside. I stared down at my bag of open chips, eating one at a time. "Where are you headed?" "South." "What for?" "Stuff." "What's your name?" "Bert." "That's interesting. My name's Alex and it's nice to meet you, Bert. Is that short for something else?" "Bertrand." "You are probably the world's worst conversationalist. I'm not an animal, you know." Setting the chips to the side, I nodded. "Yeah, I know you're not. I'm sorry." "That's better. Now, why don't you tell me why you look at me like that?" "Like what?" "Like you've seen me before." I started. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My ex." "Oh, that's rough. I'm sorry." "What made you get into the business?" I asked, hoping to change the subject. "Well, that's not something I'm asked very often." Her deep brown eyes looked off through the windshield. "It's nothing tragic if that's what you think." "That's what everybody thinks." "I guess so." "It's just a way of doing something till I die. Same reason you drive this truck. Same reason scientists watch the stars. Passing the time." "Never thought that I would meet a philosophical hooker." "Hey, don't call me that. Sorry." The cabin grew quiet and still as her left hand played with one of the holes in her blue jeans where the threads had come away in stringy clumps. She rolled them back and forth between her forefinger and thumb. "Oh, why are you always on the road?" Well, I tried thinking of a way to explain it, a way to reinforce all the reasons. "We get really sad when you're gone, and you're always gone for so long." I blinked and her eyes became tethered, hers milky, unclear. I sat there with my hands in my lap for an eternity, looking at the woman and nothing else. The world beyond disappeared. A sneaky paranoia coiled around me and squeezed. My fingers latched onto the steering wheel, running the circumference of it nervously. "What? What did you say to me?" "You're always gone and it hurts to see you gone so long. And you're always tired. Why do you do it? Why do you hate us? Do you not miss your family? Please come back and visit, please, it hurts." The woman reached out with clawed hands and I put up my own to defend myself. She screamed and grunted and grabbed a hold of my throat, pushing my head against the driver's window. Fear welling up in my stomach, I tried to speak but nothing came out. In those moments, I was sure that this woman was going to stick me with a blade and then rob me. Her icy cold fingers dug into my throat, pushing deeper into the soft tissue beneath my jaw, until I heard a pop and a sensation of my own warm blood rolled down my chest. I was gurgling and gasping for breath. Her nose was the first to go. Like hot candle wax, her face drooled off her head and dripped onto mine. I blinked sporadically through the melting face as my eyes gunked. And then I was screaming, or perhaps it was a death rattle. In a blink, I was completely alone in the cabin. My scream filled the space as I flailed my arms madly around. It was fully dark outside. Only the love sign illuminated the gray parking lot. God! I wiped my eyes and flipped the sun visor down to investigate my neck. No bruising, no blood, and nothing. Through heart-pounding seconds, I was sure that I had lost my mind. But as I cranked the engine on, I looked over to the passenger seat. There sat a black cowboy hat. I tossed it out the window once I hit the interstate and watched it cyclone around the edge of the trailer in the rearview. Home was just up the way while dawn came to meet my wandering mind. Driving for long distances gives you a lot to think about. I wonder about the reasons for life and the whys behind people's actions. But mostly I have thoughts so inconsequential and difficult that they could hardly be summed up here in words. I dropped my load off in Santa Fe and made my way over to Villanueva, a small community in the heart of New Mexico. Everything on the back roads was quiet as I took the dirt out to where my house stood among dusty hills and sagebrush. This was the place that my ex had wanted. When we were looking to buy a house, I wanted something closer to Albuquerque, but she insisted the price was better and she liked the outdoors. Well, there was plenty of that. Finally, I parked the rig with the engine still running and stared at the dark house with its blue paneling. There had once been a reason for me to get excited about it, but that seemed like a lifetime ago. She never could get over it. As I watched, the black windows caught in the headlights. The CB came alive with static. I froze and watched the black box. Words came through the speakers in sporadic sputters.
You don't want to go in, do you? You wish you could turn around and drive off. You don't want to check the mail and see the letters that you've gotten since last you were here. What's the matter with you? Don't you want to be a functioning person?
The CB sat quiet, and all that could be heard beyond the windows of the cab was the echoing howl of a coyote. Even with AC on the cab, it was warm. I lifted the CB. Who is this? Who's using the channel? A cackle escaped the box, filling me with a sense of impending doom.
Dad, don't you recognize my voice?
The receiver fell from my hand, stretching the curly cord long.
I know you weren't around much, but you would think that you would recognize your son's voice.
I rubbed my cheeks. It wasn't happening. It was no more than a manifestation of grief, or a sick joke.
What are you running from, Dad? Don't you miss?
I shut the CB off and pushed open the door to hop out. With the sun cresting the horizon and the overgrowth around my house, I felt cast from any civilized place. A part of me thought perhaps that it had been my ex's plan all along. She would get me out into the middle of the country and slowly drive me crazy. That's cruel and only half true of me to say. I understand that she had her reasons. Believe me, she was a person that refused to take a back seat, and I should have seen that in the beginning. I had the wrong idea about getting married. Seeing that the mailbox screwed to the side of the house was flipped partway open with white envelopes protruding out, I chewed my tongue. But ultimately, I tore them from the box to carry inside. The screen door was unlatched, and I pushed in through the solid metal door into the cold house. Looking over the envelopes, I saw that she had sent the papers again. I wouldn't sign them. Not because I didn't want to set her free, but I think because I couldn't set myself free. Stupid. After rummaging through the empty fridge, I opted to find a pack of ramen in the cabinet. Once I had cobbled together a jailhouse burrito, I tossed the mail in the trash and I tried watching something on the TV. My eyes didn't stay open for long, and before I knew it, I was dreaming. The images came watery and the sounds echoing. She stood in the living room pointing a finger at me, telling me that I hardly knew our son, telling me that I should have been around more. I tried telling her that everything would be better once I quit and sold the rig. We could be a happy, proper family once I had done that. But that never happened, and my son got a bad fever while I was on the road. I tried rushing back, but his body was cold when I finally showed up. The last thing that I remember before I snapped awake was his grave in Villanueva Cemetery. I would go there sometimes after, but she never could. Dark, cold sweating and sore from sleeping in an awkward position on the couch, I tried putting the dream out of my mind. There was no reason to dwell on the past, only the future. Midday light splashed into the house as I went to the window near the TV to swipe open the curtains. It splintered through the glass, forcing me to squint and making me wish that I could live in a world devoid of it. And then there was a knock on the door. I answered it to expose the sharp-dressed gentleman standing on my porch. He removed the spectacles from his face and polished them against a handkerchief. Hello," he said, before returning the glasses across his sharp-hooked nose. "It's good to see that you're home. I have something of a proposition for you, if you would be so inclined. I would like to hire somebody with your set of skills to take some cargo up to Maine. Word is that you own a truck, yes?" My mind went to the message that I had received in the CB. Was there any connection, or had I lost my marbles completely? "Who the heck are you?" Looking past his shoulder, I could see that there was a woman standing out near a black town car in my driveway, parked behind the rig. Sunglasses and a sun hat disallowed me from making out any defining characteristics of her. Of course, I'm a businessman of sorts, looking to expand to more lucrative ventures. His voice was absent, feeling scripted. There was something in the way that he carried himself that made my skin crawl. My mind immediately went back to the adage that my dad had told me. If it feels like a setup, it's a setup. I get lost. I went to close the door. Hold on. His foot shot into the threshold to keep me from shutting him out. I think I've got something that might change your mind. The man produced a rectangle of paper from his jacket pocket and slipped it to me. Holding it up, I saw that it was a check. Scrawled across the amount line was more than I made in 2 years of freelance work. Is this some kind of joke? The man raised an eyebrow. Is it not sufficient? I like to take care of my people. You want me to deliver something to Maine? I asked. He nodded. Well, that's right, yes. I understand that you're a timely driver and you live near the pickup location. And more important than anything else, you know there's more in this world than what others are willing to admit. I think you're a prime candidate. Who are you? Without me even realizing it, I gently let the door sway open a few inches. Henry. He put out his hand for a shake and I took it, totally hypnotized by his abnormal demeanor, barely registering how cold his skinny long fingers were. But seeing as you're going to be on my payroll, I would like it very much if you would call me Mr. Calgary. I am preferential to hierarchies and where people belong in them. I hope you understand. Okay. The check felt heavy. He clapped his hands together and grinned. It's so nice to meet you at last, Bertrand. So it was that I found myself on my way to pick up a shipment in Santa Rosa. The GPS worked well enough to get me in the vicinity of the pickup, but beyond that I was forced to read over the scratchy directions that Calgary had given me. It was early morning as I pulled up to the warehouse buildings bordered by high fencing and barbed wire. At the booth, guarding a mechanical arm was a man. I could see that he was an older gentleman with a cigarette hanging loosely from his lips as he rounded at the front of my rig, looked at my plate and then pointed me in. In the empty concrete square, it took no time at all to spot Calgary waving me down from the corner of a long tubular metal building. Pulling the rig around, I caught sight of a single trailer and rolled my window down. Is that the one? Do you see any others? He asked. Rolling the window up again, I muttered to myself, all right, tough guy. Once I had lined myself up with the trailer, I hopped from the cab and walked over to Calgary, standing alongside the trailer. What am I moving? I said. Don't worry about that, there's no reason for it. It will do no good to speculate over things that don't concern you. I bit my tongue. My dad's words rang in my mind again. Something was wrong with this, but the money was the only thing keeping me on the line. You'll be taking this. He tapped the side of the metal container with his knuckles. Up to Bar Harbor. Have you ever had the pleasure of visiting New England? Nope. Oh, that's a shame. Looking over his watch, he went on. Well, it's about time for you to hit the road, Jack. That's the sort of lingo that you fellows use, isn't it? Sure. All right, then I will see you in Bar Harbor when you arrive. He handed me a slip of paper. And meet me at this address. If it feels like a setup, then it's a setup. Taking the I-40 east, I tried calming my nerves with the radio, but it could not be helped. I was too stuck in my own head to do anything about it. When I had asked if I could take a look in the trailer, he told me plainly no. There was a lock on the door, and if I were to guess, I would say he probably carried the only key. Crossing over the Texas Panhandle was something that I hadn't done in years. As I caught the Big A skyline, worried whispers crept up in the back of my neck into my ear, making me question if I would ever be further west than that ever again. I was being silly. The thought of that vacation came back. Surely with the money that I would get from this haul, I would be able to take a nice long one. A voice came over the CB just as I was passing by Shamrock and my heart froze. For the briefest of moments, I thought the voice was going to hand over some earth-shattering absolutes, but it was just a fellow highwayman.
Whole mess of full-grown bears blew my doors off headed west down I-40 past Benanine. I believe it's at 1042 just up the way. Anyone headed east, expect a brake check. They had a meat wagon in tow.
I lifted the receiver. 10-4, good buddy. As prophesied, the traffic came to a halt. Hoping to catch 169 before the crash site, I hung in the right lane. Minutes went by with the cars ahead inching. That's when it started to rain. Catching sight of the Stadies clumped out there near that 3-car pileup, I did not envy them with their bright yellow ponchos in the downpour. There in the median was a sheet covering mounds. I knew what that meant. I looked ahead, twisting the radio loud and blotting out the rain with John Prine's voice. Just as it had slowed, it picked up again. The rain came down hard as the sky lit and then belted in protest. I felt a tickling slither up my right ear, but thought that it was only death in the air that had spooked me. I rubbed the dangly flesh there between fingers to scratch the itch. And then it came again, and in the dim reflection of the windshield, I caught sight of a man standing behind my chair, towering over me. Initially, his eyes rolled around confused, but I stayed frozen to the steering wheel, not taking my eyes off the road. That man was dead. Lodged into his right cheek was a smattering of broken glass, while his left eye hung clear off his face from an optic nerve. Hanging from around his purple swollen throat was a seatbelt. More than anything, I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam on the brakes. He reached out to touch my ear again, but this time I tried my best to pay him no mind. An icy rod shot through my whole body as I watched his hand pass through my head. Looking at his scraped palms, he started bellowing out words that I couldn't quite make out. I pulled my jacket around me, and then he tried talking to me, and it came in garbled whispers as the road ahead turned into a blur of lines and mile markers. You'll meet an end too. It's a setup. Tommy says hi. Seeing my bottom lip tremble in the reflection forced me to bite it shut. Night drew on and the man could no longer be seen in the windshield, but I refused to stop and regain control of my anxious breath. Shaking, I put it out of my mind as far as it would go. The black night through Oklahoma fared no better. As I drove on and the cars thinned out, I could see him standing by the side of each mile marker, mouth moving in words and never to be heard. Time became infinitesimal, incalculable. No coherency could be managed on that foreboding interstate. As the headlights blared in, I ceased to exist as a full person understanding the world. There was only the steering wheel in front of me as I urged the rig to take me on. I wished that I were done with the task and in Maine already, but I had so many hours to go. There would be no sleep until I died. Of that much I was certain. In actuality, I would have probably been fine if I had pulled off somewhere to recharge. So many odd happenings came to pass that I no longer wanted to stop. In my deprived mind, I could only think of pushing on, and so I did. Blinking slow through throbs of sleep, I found myself slipping. The mile markers and no haunting man in sight whizzed by, and the signs scrambled to indecipherable gibberish against the backdrop of a starless horizon. Still, the freeway was wide and safe, and among others. Trying to give my mind something to do, I began singing along to the CD that I had playing. Dear Abby, my feet are too long. But this proved to be no better than my jaw remaining motionless. I shut the radio off, and then came a great big yawn that forced me to squint through kaleidoscopic tears. By the time that it passed, I was confronted with something that woke me up so completely that I straightened myself in the chair and gripped the steering wheel with wide confusion. The road ahead was no longer the interstate, but a narrow, crooked road with foreign trees clawing at the trailer. Angled crooked fingers forcing a twist in my stomach. Swallowing hard, my eyes darted to the fuel gauge. Plenty left, but no idea where I was. The GPS map spun in erratic jerks, recalculating. I shut the useless thing off. Rationalizing away my superstition, I came up with any number of reasons that I might be on what had to be a back road. But each one dissipated with the thump of my front right tire hitting a pothole. The sound of crickets among the trees, as rocks kicked underneath the cab, reminded me how alone I was. The road, never-ending as it was, snaked through deep forest. Only one thought sprang to mind. This was how I died. The setup had finally caught up to me. Within that hushed insanity, I hoped and prayed that light would find me just around the next bend, but it never did. Instead, when I did see light next, it came from the rear view in the form of a pair of high beams from a pickup truck. Breathing a sigh of relief, I watched as the lights behind gained speed. I wasn't so alone after all. And then the sound of metal on metal came, and alienation rocked back to me. The truck crashed into me, swaying the trailer. My tires slid as I fought to regain control and stay on the road. What the heck are they doing? I kept them in view as well as I could through the rear view. The CB choked alive, stopping my heart short of beating.
We guard the roads and have found you a hazard.
I jerked the receiver to my mouth, certain that the person on the other end of the line was the one trying to run me off the road. What are you doing? Are you crazy? Another slam at my back end. Come on, I screamed.
Will you or will you miss it?
A tire dipped off the road and I almost overcorrected. The thrum of the engine, the lights, the snaking darkness ahead, and the trees combined to make a perfect tunnel vision of hell. Back off. And then an idea sprang to mind. I eased the brakes. Another slam came and I felt the trailer shift. It was not long until I was nearing a full stop. As they did too, a new thought came. What if they were trying to board the rig? What was I to do then? I twisted the engine off, yanked the keys from the ignition, and locked the doors before diving towards the rear of the cab where personal effects were scattered across the bed. I scanned the vicinity for something big, something that I could whack somebody with. I should have invested in that gun that I thought about years prior. Pivoting to face the front of the cabin from what I hoped was the relative safety of the darkness, I squeezed the keys between my fingers. It was hardly a weapon, but I would use them if I needed to. I watched through the small window at the head of the bed. Black shadows moved across it. In a single file line, they marched by in an approximate silhouettes. Cold swept through the cab. Even without appropriate light, I could see my own breath mist in front of my face. Something was very wrong. They weren't making any noise. I craned forward to catch a glimpse of them standing in front of the engine. There they were, too many to have piled into that pickup truck. No way. Shrouded in shadow, they circled the front of the rig, interlocking arms like they were cut from black paper and strung across that way. Teeth clenched, I waited. Could they see me? Should I have run off into those trees? A whisper rose in the air. At first, I was certain that it came from the CB, but it didn't. It was as though the speaker was standing directly next to me.
We watch you and those like you. We are the guardians of the road. Such transgressions cannot be overlooked. You must be punished.
My blood ran cold. What the heck does that mean? Speaking to the disembodied voice was peculiar, and I waited for a response as the cabin fell quiet once more, all the while feeling like a ginormous idiot. The shrouded figures merely stood outside. I relaxed my fist of keys and jumped into the seat, cranking the rig on. Headlights splashed across their disfigured and inhuman faces. My heart sank into the chair and I was frozen in equal measures of dismay, sadness, and horror. Twisted curiosities and without clothes. There they stood, arms together, blocking my path. I honked the horn once and then pushed the gas with a quick tap, lurching forward. Come on, move. They stood stalwart in their demeanor without flinching or acknowledging the rig's front bumper. I pushed on, surely they would move. They did not. I watched as they disappeared beneath the edge of the hood, and I could feel the slightest of rocks as I went over them. Move, man, I screamed. Why didn't you move? Hot tears rolled down my face. I blinked. There I was on the interstate again. White knuckles stood out like mountains in front of me. I shook all over. It was normal, I was fine. I pulled off on the next exit and parked quickly at a stop. Resting my head on the wheel, I felt sick, woozy. Fresh air might help, I thought. I removed myself from the cab and put my hands over my head to better breathe. There, just around the left wheel, I caught sight of a red smear. In a panic, I ran to the rear of the trailer, and there along the corners and edges were noticeable dents. After washing the blood, I took to dreaming that was hardly that at all. Somewhere between Bourbon and Sullivan in Missouri is where the wild things are. To keep my eyes open, I started on caffeine tablets, thinking that they would keep my tired mind sharp was ridiculous. But the images in my dreams were far from my control and I didn't want to sleep. Instead, the world went in a haze of wild colors and motions and sounds. There came a time where muscle memory alone was the only thing tending the wheel. That scares me. Things would never be normal again. If there are souls tethered between here and the next place, I resided among them in that fever dream. Catching my reflection forced to frown. Who was that man with the bruises beneath his eyes? Why hadn't he shaved? Surely that man was not me. More than once I thought of ditching the trailer in the next town somewhere and heading home. That would have been the best. I could dust my hands of the whole affair and disappear. It was the only viable option. But it wasn't like I would have anyone to go back to. I would just be as lonely there as I would be out on the road. So, what did it even matter? Time meant nothing as it seemed that gray clouds followed me, blotting out the bright blue sky and making it so that I lived in a world of hurt. A world where I never could tell if it was daytime or night. It all felt black. Unbodied voices incessantly whispered through the CB whether it was on or not, and shadow people spilled from every corner. I rolled by a minivan full of children in soccer uniforms, and upon waving at their smiling faces and giving them a hug, I saw that the person driving the van was blacked out. Just the fuzziest outline of what should have been a human. But that shape had eyes that made me uncomfortable. bulbous, white, and veiny red. It felt like I was finally seeing the world for what it was. The reality beneath the surface of what we understand. There I was, riding metal into dark space, into the edges of understanding. The hitchhiker sat in the passenger seat with his feet on the dash. Please don't do that," I begged without making eye contact. I did not like looking at him because there was certainly no way that he was real. He tugged the seatbelt wrapped around his throat as though it was a tightly lapped scarf. "Does it look like I'm worried about safety regulations?" My shoulders slumped as my fingers dangled off the wheel. "Why are you here?" "You're all by yourself." "Well, that's the way I like it." "Seems like it's been working out for you, huh?" he said. I cut my eyes to him as he idly pulled a piece of broken glass from his cheek, and black sludge oozed off his jaw, staining the floor. I felt sick. "Please go away." "Nah." "Why are you here?" "Do you know what cortisol is?" "No." He shook his head. "It's a hormone. Your cortisol's freaking whack." Only the hum of the engine could be heard as the yellow lines darted beneath the hood. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Not a clue." I blinked each eye individually. "I don't feel very well." "Any idea what you're moving?" The hitchhiker thumbed back towards the trailer. I shook my head. "Idiot." I felt movement from the trailer. I could hear it in my soul, in the recesses of my reptile brain, vibrating the minuscule hairs on my ears. The hitchhiker laughed. "You noticed that, huh?" He squinted, nodded, and dissipated into mist and then nothing at all. And I was alone, but not quite by myself. I felt the trailer rock gently once more through whatever divine means and saw a long black limb that could have been mistaken for a tree branch creep from the top of the windshield. It came down in a wavering motion before it was joined by another. My heart shot into my throat like a carnival-strength game. They were spider legs, massive spider legs. The points crept towards the edges of the hood. In stunning detail, the mandibles of the creatures exhausted the air from me until I was certain that I was in space, somewhere else. Such a ridiculous reaction it was, but I turned on the wipers and I sprayed. The spider hardly noticed. With my eyes peering through the spaces between its legs, I tried keeping my eyes on the road. Somehow I managed. The next exit found me throttling through it, and I slammed on the brakes as I came to my first stop sign. Still, the things maintained its grasp on the rig. I pulled into the nearest station and the massive spider stretched its legs. Without thought, only the need to get away from it, I pushed the driver's door open and I slung myself out, running from the cab. Bolting across the parking lot, passers-by shot me strange looks, but I paid them no mind. As I reached the station's door, I wagered a glance over my shoulder. Nothing was on my rig, nothing at all. I had lost my mind, of course. Heart still beating, I crossed the parking lot toward my rig, fist clenched, teeth grinding. After rounding the front of the engine several times, examining my surroundings in 1,000 crusty blinks, I took a deep breath. And that's when I saw the spider legs again. They came from the sky and reached down to consume my vision, and then it dawned on me. The spider had not been a giant creature. It was on my face. I screamed and swatted at my brow. The spider, roughly the size of my hand, smacked the ground on its back. I slammed a foot on it and hunkered down while putting my face in my hands. There's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with everything. I had been too tired to feel it on my face, and my delusional mind wasn't seeing things right. "Hey there, cowboy." I looked up to see a man, well, mostly a man, standing over me with his hands on his hips. He wore a badge, but his face was like that of the driver I had seen in the minivan. He looked like he had been cut from deep black absence. "Officer?" I nodded at him. "You all right?" His lidless eyes ran along his face like fried eggs, drooping where his mouth should have been. I'm fine. I tried averting my gaze to the ground as I stood. Tired? He asked. Sure. Yeah, my daddy was a trucker. I get how it is, but you should get some sleep. You were swerving back there. I nearly pulled you over, but figured I'd give you a warning. Get some sleep, cowboy. His bulging eyeball rolled clean off his face and slapped the ground. I shivered and took in a great deal of air while looking at it and restraining my gag reflex. Will do, sir. He turned to walk away but stopped and pivoted to look back at me before going back to his car. You know, spiders lay eggs. Why would you say that to me? Have a good sleep, cowboy. He tipped his hat and left me standing there in awe. I don't know what to think anymore. I think I'm done with this. I don't want to go any further and I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll just shut my eyes like the officer said and slowly drift off into the void.